The king ordered preparations to be made for his departure to Irogo. His daughter, the first Princess Aristina, was to marry a barbarian. In the king's opinion, she was useless, but at least this way he could use the noble blood flowing through her veins. Her father, the emperor, ordered her into a political marriage with the hostile state of Irugo. A month later, Aristina set out on her journey. She followed her father's words unquestioningly, which was only an appearance. She was finally rid of her hated homeland and her even more hated father, who was indeed insane. Her father, the emperor, in order to satisfy his only desire to make her a winner, committed various kinds of violence against her. One day, Aristina opened her eyes and saw that all the windows were closed and pillars of fire were blazing everywhere. She would have died if she had hesitated to get out, for she was 6 years old at the time. The emperor looked at the girl like a coal, and the man who locked the windows and started the fire was her own father. More than her burned lungs and more than her blistering limbs, her heart ached. In addition, right after that incident, she was separated from her younger sister for 10 years, which was not the shortest time. That was enough time for her heart to burn to the ground. However, she was fortunate that through her imprisonment, she was able to see her past life, and it was good for her to depart. But when she thought she was putting her sister down, she realized it was worth considering her future. Irugo was a place ruled by fire and iron. It was the land of barbarians, an isolated plain surrounded by demons. The barbarians that inhabit Irugo are neither humans nor demons, but creatures that have banded together. She was to sleep in the same bed with a man linked to a demon, a man more attracted to demons than a cold person like her. That's what her father thought. Irugo is an enemy state to them, and he was not happy to avoid war this time, because since long ago everyone believed that Sylvanus is a conquering country, but only one territory. Irugo was unconquered. Her father, the current emperor, said he would accomplish the feat of conquering this state. However, he lost, and the reason he lost was Tarkin, her future husband. The king offered them a truce, believing that further hostilities would only bring casualties. Irugo, knowing that their lands were surrounded by demons and that continuing the war would be a burden to the country, proposed a marriage of convenience. This meant that the countries were no longer at war with each other and were allies. But in reality, her father had no intention of ending the war, as the truce was only meant to buy time. He plans to deprive Irugo of all determination to win and then to start the war again and occupy the territory. That's why he sent Aristina as a discarded card, because her death will fall on Irugo's shoulders, and declaring war on the country that has made a marriage alliance will be a moral obligation. However, the emperor did not realize that the card he wanted to kill would give him a huge surprise. But for that to happen, Aristina first needed to establish a partnership with one man, her husband. From the moment she was sent away in a carriage instead of through a portal, she suspected that something was wrong. And of course she was right, for she hadn't left the carriage for almost 10 days, after which it seemed to her that these limbs were not hers. When she wanted to change her uncomfortable dress, the knights had knocked at the carriage window, and now she was suddenly asked to get out. The place where they made a stop was modest, but tea and desserts had been prepared. Looking into the tea, she saw a moment from the future as a girl spilled boiling water on her, and everyone around her laughed. For this was the appearance befitting a barbarian bride. It was the emperor's eye, the ability that her father coveted, and the ability he thought she could not possess, but she could see the past, present, and future. She decided to look around, and as expected, a girl wearing the same clothes as she had seen through the cup approached her. In other words, what she had just seen through the cup was bound to happen in the future, and at the moment when the girl was about to spill boiling water on her, she pushed her away and the water poured out on the girl herself. As I expected, the future Aristina saw with the emperor's eye completely changed. The other girls came up to her to find out why she did it, but it wasn't Aristina's fault as she just stood up from her seat. The fact that the water spilled wasn't her fault after all. She wasn't supposed to be the nanny. After watching the girls, Aristina realized that they were bullying someone else, but they didn't even think that they could get hurt themselves. By doing so, they realized they could hurt themselves, and at least on a subconscious level, the scar the girl received would make them stop their bullying. The princess had originally thought that she would be quiet until she arrived in Irugo, but the scene seen through the Emperor's eye changed her mind. After all, she can't use her ability whenever she wants, and if she sat still, she would really get burned. Many of the girls there had heard that during the 10 years of confinement, the princess had become insane and had no education and no manners like a commoner. But they wondered why she behaved so elegantly. After that day, it was felt that the maids became more hesitant in their abuse. Apparently, they felt sorry for themselves after all. They only capriciously tried to trample her clothes and really thought it would hurt her. Compared to splashing boiling water on Aristina, the level of such bullying was very cute. Even though her clothes were dirty, they were much more comfortable from that tight dress. However, even though it was only a political marriage, she needed to prepare a new set of clothes, because she only had the dresses she had worn in her confinement. Yes, and besides, she couldn't even wear that new dress, as it was completely stained. Even though Aristina knew about the Emperor's plans, she felt that this dress would be perfect for the wedding. A couple of days later, they finally arrived at the western gate of Irugo, where the people of Silvanus were considered vile and treacherous, as well as weak-willed cowards. The guards arrived to greet the attendants, as well as the first Princess Aristina, but they were surprised why they had come by carriage rather than using a portal. With maids worrying about their outfits and carriages adorned with magnificent gems, the guards could already tell what the princess was like without even looking at her. However, they were extremely astonished when a small girl came out of the carriage covered in mud and dirt, looking like a dirty lump. Compared to the fancy carriages, her outfit was old and dirty, and many people had already realized what the Emperor of Silvanus was up to. He wanted to send the girl there in the scruffiest way possible, because the war had been avoided. But Silvanus was only waiting for the moment, because he didn't care how she would be treated in Irugo. And on the contrary, he wanted her to be received so coldly, and ordered to make the princess as dirty as possible. He ordered knights and fancy gifts that would demonstrate the still strong fighting power of Silvanus. And the princess, as a dirty gray mouse, was to demonstrate that she would be perfect for a trash like them and fit their status, which was an obvious mockery. Hearing the outrage of the people, Aristina realized that this was quite the expected reaction. She could not shy away from such treatment, however, and as she approached the man, she wondered if this man was her husband, for she had heard that Tarkin would meet her at the entrance gate. It looked like this man had the highest status in Irugo, and she thought his face was very handsome. He had a pleasant voice and was also very courteous and not embarrassed by her appearance. However, Aristina noticed that he was too polite to her, and as it turned out, he was beneath her in status as he was assigned to escort her. She was upset that it was not Tarkin. She was told that he had gone hunting, which surprised her, because it was a sign that their marriage life would not be too good, and the princess thought that her future husband was shy. Aristina thought that the best way to show her good-natured side was to smile and insist on an answer, although she had not thought about it, but this was different from her first stay in the Empire. There was no need to worship anymore. There were no people there who shunned her, hated her. In other words, they didn't expect anything from her. So she didn't have to live up to their expectations, her eyes shining like stars in her dirty face. And the maids resented that the knights dared to call her princess dirty, and didn't realize who they were, that they dared to ask the princess to put on Irugo's clothes before even entering the palace. It was their reaction to Durant recommending that the princess wash and change her clothes before entering the palace. Aristina realized that before this, Silvanus's men were not at all alarmed, because it was too blatant a way to start a fight. Durant took a step back to avoid the quarrel as the king was not present, and he left it at that. For the prince wished for the war to end, and though the political marriage would not be dissolved, the rumors would fall on Tarkin's shoulders, so they were not to stir up controversy. As they approached the palace, Durant noticed carriages bearing the coat of arms of the third Prince Martin, the coat of arms of the first princess, the coat of arms of Lady Enicarina, and many others who had apparently decided to reconnoiter. In fact, Mr. Tarkin couldn't come to meet his bride because of the monsters, but the guy didn't understand why the other royals were idling then. Inquisitive eyes were directed at Aristina, inspecting her from head to toe, Countless gazes were pointing at her like spears and arrows. They were meeting a bride from a distant country. When they saw her, they did not understand what they expected from a low-born consort, for they were expecting the so-called princess of Sylvanus. But the girl did not even look like a beggar who hung around under the bridge of the river. Her maid said that she did not think that if she got to Arago something would change, because she could not expect a different reception, and now the princess would finally realize her place and be meek. Durant didn't understand what the people who came with her from their homeland were doing. They were supposed to protect her, but all they did in return was mock her. Suddenly, precious silks that could not be exchanged even for a chest of pure gold were snatched from the knight's hands and taken to Prince Irugo himself. Tarkin wrapped the girl in this silk and lifted her in his arms, saying that the most precious things should be given to his bride, and his eyes sparkled like sunbeams. Though the prince did nothing remarkable, the proud Selvans did not utter a word. However, after they left, the boy asked the princess not to be mistaken, because he did it because he didn't like the way his siblings talked to her, not because she was pretty. It was obvious, however, that this act would be dangerous if he liked her, since she was like a lump of dust covered in sweat, and what could be said of his preference if she came to his liking? He ordered the maids to wash the princess. Aristina, on the other hand, noticed that he was overstained with the blood of the monsters, though it wasn't as noticeable on the black robe, but it was just as stained. They were not married yet, and therefore they had to decide who would go to wash first. The guy tried to find the words, because he was used to communicate with soldiers on the battlefield, and so do not treat girls who grew up in beautiful castles. The man realized that she meant that they were not married yet, so they could not bathe together. And when she wondered if he would go to wash, he replied that he would wash elsewhere. It struck Aristina that it was normal for castles to have several places for bathing. She had lived alone and in confinement for too long, so she had forgotten some things and asked the maid to guide her. Tarkin, on the other hand, thought the girl was strange. Initially, he thought she was crying. But if she was related to the blood aristocrats and grew up in a beautiful palace, she was not used to such constant situations. But she looked as if she had become emotionless, for she was no longer able to be proud. However, he didn't understand why he was so overwrought. When it was decided to make a political marriage, he did not fix his attention on the woman he was being married to. The girl was very happy since she saw that there was a bath and also warm water. She had not been cared for in this way since she was a young girl. The maids had a businesslike demeanor and professional approach, but she had only met maids that ignored her constantly, so such respectful behavior was strange to her, which meant her future husband was charismatic and resourceful. It was good that their negotiating opponents had such abilities, and Aristina was obliged to win her husband over to her side. The girls stopped. Aristina thought they were done, but the maids looked into her mystical violet eyes that looked like dawn and sparkling silver hair. The maids helped her rinse her head a few more times before she sent them away and decided to put all her plans on hold. For now, it was worth resting. It was only because of this moment that she thought the journey to Irugo for the wedding had been a success. There was a splash of water, which was a sign of the activation of the Emperor's eye, and she hoped her vision would be useful. On the water appeared her husband Tarkin, who looked like his current self, so the memories were either from the near future or the past. No matter how much he liked the design of the garment, he couldn't continue to walk around in the blood-stained garment, so she hoped it would be the near past, because even though it was a political marriage, she didn't really like dirty men. A girl in beautiful clothes came up to him and asked him if he liked the princess, but the man replied that it was impossible because his heart was unchanging. It was obvious to Aristina that there was no love in a political marriage, and if Tarkin's beloved was in her vision, it could play into her hands, and she would have another bargaining chip in her negotiations with him. She was anxious to rest, but now she had a chance to get away from the watching eyes, for at the same time the servants who had come from Sylvanus were inspecting the interior of the palace. Diona, the girl next to Tarkin, was happy that the man was still the same, relaxed as a predator, hard to approach, elegant and dangerous, for she was surprised when he suddenly stood up for the princess. Suddenly, they were told that the princess had come to see him. Tarkin and the rest of the villagers reacted very strangely to her, for they compared her to that clod of dust. Diona had forgotten her beauty and panicked, For what if the princess thought she was ignoring her? For she could not let a conflict break out in front of Tarkin. She thought it was luck that the first princess had arrived, and not the second one who was considered incredibly beautiful. But as it turned out, there was no reason to be happy. Tarkin asked her why she was looking for a meeting with Diona, but Aristina answered that they would soon become a married couple, so they could just have tea together and talk. She took a sip of tea and was amazed, because it was the first time she drank such high-quality tea. Although she had not come there of her own free will, she did not think that it would be so good, but it was better to keep it a secret from her husband. However, she admitted that she did not come there to have a nice chat with him and decided to go straight to business, offering him to start a business. Not love, not power does not make much sense to her. All she needed was a lot of money. With that money, she planned to buy her freedom to go wherever she wanted and look at whatever she wanted, and no one else would be able to lock her up. She would keep her eyes open for those visions that only manifested on the water side, but for that, she would need a lot of money, and to combine her and Tarkin's powers. Even though she had seen her past life through the Emperor's eye, in this world her entrepreneur's disease was the cause of her troubles, for it was the eternal desire to get more money by taking extreme risks. She clarified, however, that she did not ask the man to borrow money or ask him to invest. However, she noticed that the man was looking at her with a very annoyed look and asked her not to look that way. The man hoped that she wasn't going to use the money allocated for the prince's upkeep as a business investment. Aristina had only talked to people a few times, so her way of relaying information had become rather strange. She explained that the arranged marriage had politically woven them together, so it would be good to create a victorious union in which they would help each other, and she was not talking about a strong friendship, but about business. Tarkin asked what Aristina would do if he helped her. He didn't know what she could do with her thin hands that looked like they couldn't lift a fork. The princess realized that he did not trust her at all, because at first he treated her as a fraud, and now she was too fragile for him. That's why she suggested him to sit down at the negotiating table where she could show her talents. At the same time, the other royals were discussing that the princess looked like a beggar and probably did not understand what a royal wedding was because they considered it neglect and heard that the princess had a mental illness. Her consciousness would constantly leave her, then return to normal. It was because of this that she was kept in isolation for 10 years, because everyone in the palace knew about this secret. They didn't understand how His Highness Tarkin would marry such a girl, and if Tarkin became the crown prince, this girl could become the wife of the heir to the throne, which would undermine Arugo's authority. His Highness Tarkin was now His Majesty's favorite, and the war was over. He had performed great feats on the battlefield, but ruling a country was a completely different matter. That was why, in their opinion, His Highness Hamir was far more suited to the role of crown prince. Their conversations quieted down as Tarkin passed by them. They realized that they should start watching their words, because with the end of the war, the Lord was in the palace very often. The girls admired his appearance, his straight nose and golden eyes, and whenever they looked at him, he was noble and handsome, which made their hearts flutter. Following him was Aristina, and all were surprised, for they did not recognize her, for she was no longer the beggar in rags, but looked quite different. King Arugo Nefter was informed that the princess and His Highness Tarkin had decided to visit him. He was surprised, for the official audience with the Sylvanus delegation was to take place tomorrow afternoon, and did not understand why the princess had come separately. The second Princess Enikarina intervened in the conversation and suggested that they meet after all, for she was interested in seeing the rumored princess who was to become a member of their family. However, the king knew that she and the other princes and princesses had gone to see her daughter-in-law, and her intentions were obvious, but still said that he had no government business and saw no reason to refuse. The girl gloated, for it was getting funnier and funnier, and she could make that dirty princess laugh right in front of her father. Looking at Tarkin, she thought that he was worried about that beggar. Maybe he would even beg to change the wedding terms. Annika was worried because her father wanted the princess of Sylvanus, but she didn't think she was too valuable because no one could be her father's favorite more reliably than the princess herself. To her surprise, Aristina entered the hall with graceful gestures and precise manners. But the king had been told that it was not the second, but the first daughter who was isolated, so he did not have high expectations. Aristina exhaled, for she easily memorized what she saw through the Emperor's eye. However, she was very worried that her body would not obey her, but judging by their reaction, she had made a good first impression. She was served a dessert called frinfran jelly, which was Arugo's specialty. Unlike regular jelly, it was more elastic and had a sweet and sour flavor. And when you mix the sweet and sour flavors, it must feel like there's a party going on in your mouth. If a famous chef with a strict and picky taste praised it, it would become fashionable to serve frinfran even in hostile countries like Sylvanus. The princess saw the original in person and wanted to taste it very much, but she stopped herself because she couldn't eat it until it proved its worth, and she was craving for someone else's property. Then she promised herself to demonstrate her skill in salesmanship. Tarkin was uneasy and hoped that she had no intention of selling anything to his father. The king said that the audience would be held in the afternoon, but he asked what reason the girl had for wanting to meet him beforehand. However, she was interrupted when the other princes and princesses entered the room, saying that they were honored to see such a high-ranking Sylvanus person, and asked if Tarkin had waited for her because she was rumored to be a beauty, and the empire had been famous for beautiful women for thousands of years. However, they were stunned when they saw the princess, who was indeed called a beggar. Not knowing that the princess's appearance had changed, they deliberately praised her in order to humiliate her. The princesses were confused and tried not to show any doubts. They realized that she had washed and dressed up before coming and now looked like a completely different person. However, they did not understand why the queen had not given such important information when she sent them there. The princesses decided to get out of it by starting to resent how Aristina could not recognize them since they were not servants. Was the princess from Sylvanus completely unaware of such simple rules of etiquette? They abruptly changed their behavior after deliberately praising their opponent. This was the characteristic speech style of royalty. Their speech was like the swords of knights, and Tarkin himself was still not used to the acting and masks that the palace aristocracy tried on. He had many enemies in the castle, and because of that the princess was inconvenienced, which she should not be. He needed to keep the princess safe until things settled down, so he asked her to keep silent. The girl thought that if she showed her abilities at least a little, it would not be rude and she should ask him to become a business partner. Aristina said that they had a little misunderstanding and she did not ask who she was, because at some point it seemed to her that they had already met somewhere. The princess was surprised that she remembered her. Aristina started to ask the others, because she was sure that she had seen them somewhere. The princess realized that she had just confirmed everything with the help of the dialogue, and she had not just mistaken her, but remembered her exactly, because she had seen them there. Although she had heard that during the isolation, Aristina could not learn anything and went crazy. But in fact, it was not true at all. Aristina's life was a world that happened to be reflected in the water. She remembered everything because it was a world without observation and good memory. Annika realized that her father, the king, was interested in the princess, and if the princess told her father about what happened in Tarkin's palace, their unexpected visit to the tea room would not be seen as something funny, but was dangerous. In one of them, Aristina recognized the very princess who said she had low-born blood in her. Stalin's gaze was filled with contempt and hostility. Even though she looked like an adult, she thought like a child. The second princess calmed her down, for she was quite savvy, as the crown prince of Arugo had not yet been determined. And now there was a battle between the factions of the first Prince Hamir, born of the queen, and the second Prince Tarkin, who might take the throne. Unlike Prince Hamir, Tarkin is born of a commoner, which is his political weakness. However, the more problematic and underlying cause is the battle between the old and new factions. It was the same in her past life, and she asked did the princesses doubt her membership in the imperial family, or were concerned about her origins. In the meantime, the queen was informed that the princesses and princes had gone to the main palace, and since this was an unofficial audience, their visit would not look unusual. She hoped that Annika and the other princesses would do well, as they were very perceptive and were in her entourage. The other princesses began to blame Stalin because she was small and did not know when to speak and when to keep silent, and unfortunately, She could not distinguish reality from fiction. So they asked Aristina to be magnanimous. Stelina did not understand what had happened because her sister had always been on her side. Tarkin thought that his fiancée had done a very clean job, but the official audience with the Sylvanus representatives would take place tomorrow. And if the Sylvanus knew what had happened today, they would not miss their chance to break the peace treaty that made Irugo the winner. But it was not done yet, and it was like walking on thin ice. Trade agreements, right of passage, right of use, and more, even if they were the words and actions of an immature princess. This time Sylvanus would try to use them as an excuse to get more profit. And then it would be on the queen's shoulders, so they would try to make it up to her. But the only question was, whose side the king had already taken. When Aristina arrived in Irogo, she didn't think to pay attention to their rude behavior and just wanted them to be quieter. But then she noticed the king's gaze on her for a long time. As long as it went against her plan and she got King Irugo's attention, it was pretty good, and if you thought about it, she was worth the attention. And she figured that if she stepped out of line a little, it wouldn't be a problem of national importance. It would be a problem of a princess of an enemy state rebuking his daughters. Now she would be living in Irugo, so contempt for the king would not play into her hands. So she smiled and looked at the king and said that she had been insulted when she arrived there, and she was very sad. She was called a hillbilly and despicable, and it was not just condemnation because of her origin. She heard it herself and saw people who didn't even know her. The king replied that the imperial family had finally decided to sign a peace treaty, and this could make things worse, so he would interrogate everyone present and find out the truth and bring those responsible to justice. Princess Annika thought that if Aristina now tells her father everything, the dirty war will start, and the recognition of the princess will fall. So she thought about taking responsibility, but asked Stalin to apologize to the princess. She realized that they had made too many jokes about the princess, as well as being subject to rumors and their own inattention. And it was all because of her ignorant half-sister, because her explosive nature had to be taken into account. With a grin, Stalina apologized, and the princess remembered that she had said something else about her low-bornness. Therefore, she was obliged to apologize to the princess properly. Stalina didn't want to apologize to her and didn't understand why she had to do it in front of this half-breed. After all, she had just taught this princess who was hated by everyone. It was quite funny that the stubborn, arrogant fourth princess apologized and kneeled down. Tarkin watched to see if Aristina was pleased with the apology, and he thought she was pleased. But it was a little different from what he had imagined. She looked like the one who had brought the princess of the entire country to her knees with just a few words, which Tarkin liked very much. Aristina in turn realized that there was a lot of disagreement between the half-siblings, but that wasn't all. She had to deal with the situation and didn't expect it to turn out this way, because the princess had never insulted her. And she didn't ask her to apologize, so she leaned over and said that she just asked if there was anything else she wanted to say to her. And giving her hand, she pretended as if it was nothing to her. She was uncomfortable watching the princess kneeling. From the outside, she was magnanimous with a patient, measured speech, as well as a cold stare. With a smile, the king who was watching this realized that Princess Aristina was smart, because she knew her position and knew how to use it, which was brave and within the bounds of propriety, nothing excessive. He asked them all to sit down, for they had come unexpectedly during the tea party and made a mess. If you look at it that way, they acted too recklessly. Princess Annika said that she was very sad, because she didn't understand why her relatives had acted like that on that day, as they were to become a family. They made such a bad first impression of themselves, and didn't know what to do if the princess misunderstood and disliked them. Aristina noticed that unlike the people of Irugo, the princess had a frail build, white skin, and she and her father had the same turquoise eyes. She was the daughter of the queen, which meant she was Hamir's younger sister. When Annika suggested calling her sister, Aristina thought of that child, her younger sister. So she gladly agreed, because the princess was very much like her little sister. After all, the second princess was a beautiful and sweet child. Even when Christina was a baby, she watched her and saw her through the emperor's eye while she was imprisoned. And even when she was locked up because of her, The girl remained sweet. The princess felt sorry for Aristina, for she had made a political marriage without love, and when she arrived, she met rough and blood-smelling men. Annika pondered how else to get her attention, but realized that if this silly girl loved her too much, it would be annoying. But she had to be kind to please her father. Aristina did not notice how she addressed her in the first person, and asked if she could call her informally, since they were now sisters, or even in communication between sisters, it was necessary to adhere to etiquette. Arisina wasn't very good at it, so she admitted it was her mistake, but she thought the princess was sincere. Annika, on the other hand, was outraged because she didn't understand what sincerity was about, since she could only be a little sister to Hamir. She was annoyed because Aristina didn't understand the innuendo at all, and went on to say that her younger sister always treated her with respect, and even at a very young age, she spoke to her formally. But Annika grinned maliciously, for Aristina still did not know that if the king was brought a frinfran jelly, he always gave it to her, for she was very fond of that jelly. So she said that His Majesty could have given his portion to her as usual, but to everyone's surprise, Arisina began to feed the king with the jelly from a spoon. Tarkin said that even though the ceremony hadn't taken place yet, after the wedding she would be their family, so she could start calling him father right away. And it was strange to hear such surprise from Annika when she already addressed the girl as a member of the family and her sister. The great king of metal and blood was cold stern, but now he was doing such a thing in front of everyone and agreed to have Aristina address him as her father. The other princes were surprised because they thought that he was going to shout that the jelly should be put away immediately because His Majesty was eating a dessert that he had never touched before. It looked like the princess was really special. In fact, the frinfran jelly was quite difficult to pick up, but the practice had paid off. Earlier in Sylvanus, Aristina had seen her younger sister feeding the emperor frinfran, while she watched through the emperor's eye and tried to pick up the clay with a fork. There were times when she really wanted to hear her father's praise, but after she realized that he dreamed not of a daughter, but of the emperor's eye, she abandoned her dreams. There was one secret. A secret that neither the servants nor even Tarkin knew. Princess Annika didn't just want to eat because of what she was begging for jelly beans. The whole worry was that His Majesty the King had a secret. He had a broken right wrist, and though the injury had no effect on his life, and in wartime it can easily cause turmoil and anxiety among the people, as well as undermine morale. But the king kept it hidden. But since such a slippery food as jelly could raise suspicions, he preferred to avoid it. But nevertheless, flinfran jelly, which is the traditional dessert of Irugo, is always served at official dinners. Only the king's attending physician and Princess Annika knew about this secret, which is why he always gave the princess his jelly. Many people thought that although His Majesty especially appreciated Prince Tarkan, but among all the princesses, he favored Annika the most, because she was very nice. And also it was a reliable support for the Prince of Peace and the Queen. She planned to strengthen the position of Hamir's brother so that everyone would call her the favorite of her father. But if she wanted to protect the Emperor's secret, she should have just fed her father herself. From the point of view of Tarkin, who didn't know about her father's injury, it might have seemed a little unreasonable, for there was nothing worse than not being able to eat what you wanted while you were sick. Aristina didn't know if the king would be angry at her for treating him like a child, because she had been around people so little that she didn't know anything. She was used to formal communication and had no idea how she would react in such a situation. The king smiled and said that even though he was not the initiator of this marriage, he was really satisfied with everything, and he had to repay her for making him happy, and asked her what she wanted. The girl was amazed, for she was allowed to call him father, and he called her by her diminutive name. It had finally happened. She knew she shouldn't make a big deal out of it, but it turned out that he had become a father to her, which made her very happy. When he asked her if she wished for something, he hit the target, because she had one wish. Although actually, the fact that she fed His Majesty was actually seen by her through the Emperor's eye, she didn't expect that she would dare to do so. She finally had the chance to reveal the true purpose of her visit, because she said she wanted to cleanse Irugo of the reputation of the country of barbarians. She had finally spoken and seemed to have proven her skills, for she was a treaty that deserved to be sealed even without reading its terms. Everyone was shocked by her statement, for in fact she hadn't actually said anything to Tarkin about her plans on the way to the tea room. After meeting the king and queen, his siblings played it up. Tarkin, however, said that he had noticed her crying when she first arrived at the palace, when the royal scions bullied her, for she was the princess of Sylvanus and not used to such things. However, the girl said that she was used to it, and seeing his serious expression asked, did he not know that she was in confinement? After all, the rest of the royal family knew about it. She was surprised how he didn't know about it, how much he didn't care about his own fiancé. Come to think of it, when she arrived at the palace she had a vision through the emperor's eye, and maybe he didn't like her because she wasn't just dirty. She finally realized what he was worried about, and said they were going to have a political marriage anyway because they needed to mend their relationship, and asked directly if Tarkin wanted war. She hoped that he would answer her honestly, because while they were talking in Sylvanus, everyone was preparing for war, and among her things, there was a deadly poison prepared to kill Tarkin. At the same time, the Sylvanus maids were given a tour of the palace, and were surprised that a barbarian state that could only fight monsters had mastered such an art of construction. They began to discuss the man who was rumored to be a monster, but contrary to their expectations, he turned out to be quite handsome and not suitable for the beggar-like princess. So they hoped that he would soon lose interest in the princess, because she was a savage who spent 10 years in confinement, and it was obvious that she was strange. However, their conversation was interrupted by one of the knights, who informed them that their princess had gone to meet King Irugo. When he heard about it, she had already returned from the meeting, and now she was talking alone with that barbarian. They were angry because they thought the foolish princess still didn't understand her place. Tarkin told the princess that he was not the kind of man who wanted war, but the girl explained that the point was that the easiest way to win a war was to kill her. She said that by being a spy she could pass important information to Sylvanus, or she could try to kill him by putting the prince's guard down. But there was no reason for her to risk it for Sylvanus, for whom she had no good feelings, and the emperor hated her, which meant that she had not come there of her own free will. She decided to take the initiative and tell the first thing. The fact that she was kept in confinement was easy to find out after a little investigation. Tarkin already realized that it was not a topic that could be brought up lightly. However, if the emperor was so unwilling to see her that he had isolated her, there was a good chance that the wedding had been arranged only for her death. The girl smiled and said she didn't want to die, and if the prince did not want to incite war, their interests coincided and she was ready to show her talents. Besides, she could take over the work he couldn't deal with during his absence, and it would be good to create a victorious union, because now there was a battle for the place of the heir. She only wanted to create a union to help him, and she was willing to do her best to keep him safe, because peaceful relations depended on it. Tarkin only realized that all this long dialogue about the trade alliance, about victory and everything else, was only to save her life, which was a matter of course. He wondered how she'd been treated if she didn't even care who her marriage partner was. And even when she was being bullied, her overly calm expression pissed him off. Arisa ate all the cookies and realized she hadn't talked so much in a long time, and she had a sore throat, and the eternal smile was taking a lot of energy. She didn't know if it looked strange that she was smiling so hard. It was her way of surviving through the emperor's eye, for it was better to smile when convincing the person she was talking to. Today was her first time in conducting such long conversations, but she hoped she had done pretty well. Oh, and unlike their first meeting, Tarkin seemed more gentle, though there was a little of the pervert in him. But luckily for him, they understood each other, and finally it was time to act. Because of that, she offered to help each other for the sake of common safety. They were devoid of any love as business partners. Arkan asked her if she wanted something other than that, to which the girl happily replied that she had a great business idea. After talking to Tarkin, she was met in the hallway by the knight, asking where she had gone, that she was coming back so late. Since she had come to Irugo, she should behave properly, as she had been reprimanded by the maids because of the princess, and had to scare her so that the princess would not leave again. But the prince appeared behind her back, and the knight was frightened, saying that it was the internal affairs of Sylvanus, and he should not pay attention to it. With his whole look, he showed that he needed the princess's help, and only she could calm this barbarian. Tarkin replied that it was their internal affairs, but it concerned his fiancée directly, and approached him and pushed him so that the boy flew off. Lying on the floor, the knight was indignant, saying he would definitely file a protest. But Tarkin thought he was her fiancée's dog, so it was better for his mistress to decide what to do with him. The prince was not happy that Tarkin was holding him down with his foot, and asked the princess to hurry up and subdue him, but she only looked at him confused. Aristina was really at a loss, for these people were always like this, always discussing and insulting her, saying that she didn't talk much and wasn't intelligent, but she was pretty in person. When they went to Arugo, she was soiled, but they thought it would change everything, even though they knew she was destined for marriage to that savage barbarian. Remembering all these moments, she was surprised that now one of these people was asking for help. So she approached her fiancé, saying to step on the guy even harder. After Tarkin fulfilled his bride's wish, he ordered the servants to send him to the dungeon. The prince's hand was so strong, because he was a warrior, he easily dealt with that knight. And the girl finally understood him, because beating others he felt delight, and she respected his tastes. Thanks to him, she also enjoyed it. She was shown to her bedroom, and though she would only use it until the marriage ceremony, it was perfectly cleaned, as if she were truly welcome. Even though the rest of Yi said she had come to Irugo to die, she was really glad she was getting married to a marriage of convenience. After all of Irugo's maids left her chambers, her maids from home surrounded her, waiting for her to say something to them. Aristina, on the other hand, felt that they weren't even on the same level as dogs. After all, they had no sense of duty or trust, and even dogs were cuter. Palace companions are formed from ladies who came from the highest aristocratic families. They are different from the usual maids and courtiers. After all, in the end they become interlocutors for the imperial personages or assistants in business. Only noble and erudite girls from the highest aristocratic families can become companions, but the girls accompanying her were from unremarkable families, ordinary ladies. Entering the abandoned palace of the princess, they only giggle and plunder the budget little by little. Despite the cries of the maids, Aristina thought that today she had had a busy day and was very tired, so she wanted them to leave as soon as possible. The maids looked at her and thought that the princess had always been like this, and no matter how much she was scolded and reproached, she was careless and could not understand anything. Even when her holy clothes were trampled with dirty feet, and even when her food was filled with rubble, she was a fool who blinked her eyes and understood nothing. It was because of this girl that she had to go to Irugo. She didn't want to babysit a forgotten princess, and she wouldn't have had to if her family had more money. The maid looked at her and said that it seemed that Aristina had forgotten her immediate duty and that she had been sent to Irugo to die. The princess looked at her calmly and said that the girl was mistaken. After all, they were in Irugo, not Sylvanus, saying that they really couldn't even be dogs if they had no idea how they should behave from now on. And she didn't know what to do since she only took in well-mannered dogs, and wondered what was usually done with wild mutts, assuming they were trophies or prey for a predator. The maids were outraged and thought she was mocking them, promising to report it to His Majesty. Aristina realized how stupid they were, but didn't know if she should tell them and show these indescribable fools the reality. Rosalind's headmaid stepped back, remembering what she had been told about how Tarkin had seriously beaten the knight, and wondered if all those eye blinks in response to the taunts and rebukes were just covering up the princess's claws. Aristina, who used the mask of a fool, flawlessly deceived everyone. The princess went on to say that dogs understood human speech perfectly well. After all, they were smart. If they were told to sit down, they sat down or waited. She wondered where she could find such a dog. Suddenly, Rosalind came and knelt down in front of her and started barking, because all this time, she was the one who had been bullying the princess the most. And if she was thrown into Aristina's hands, where she had no ties, she had no choice but to bark in order to survive. The princess was also surprised, for even she could not have predicted it, for the maid changed her position very quickly. But it was clever, for if a man was in danger, he could pretend to be a dog. The maid continued to act like a dog, barking and taking the ball from the princess's hands, from which the other maids were terrified and thought that she had gone mad. Rosalind realized that after all her words, nothing could be changed, and for the sake of survival, she was ready to pretend to be a dog as long as necessary. The other maids, who did not realize the situation, looked at her as if she were crazy. Aristina wanted to make her a hunting dog, and Rosalind liked it, for she was willing to bring the trophies she wanted, and when she had caught all the game, she would have only one goal, the princess. On the Arugo training ground at the same time Tarkin was practicing, remembering all the nasty words the royals had said about him and his fiancée. He had never been ashamed of his origins, but marrying into a Sylvan imperial family, whose veins were said to have gold in them, had been the king's obvious intention, to make up for his political weakness as an illegitimate child. He realized that the struggle for the throne was becoming more and more serious, and this battle could not be avoided. He was distracted from his thoughts by Durant, who said that all the warriors were already assembled and he should go to the conference room. As he entered, each of the boys greeted him, and they decided to start the meeting with a report on the monster's corpse they had found yesterday. The conditions they were given were a request to move the processing of the magical stones mined there to the east, and a claim that there was not enough wood at the Blue Turtle Guard post. There was also a claim from the south that the number of monsters had increased. There were requests for help from the Red Raven area, and their troops were asking for replenishment every day. Because of this, one of the guys present suggested a large-scale mop-up before winter came. Tarkin couldn't neglect the administration of the plain because of the war with Sylvanus. Everyone was also curious as to what kind of person the princess was, for no matter how many times they questioned Durant, he never answered, for he was rather dull. The same could not be said about Durant's subordinates, because there could be problems, because they could act rashly as they might like the princess. Durant intervened in the conversation and told them to choose their expressions, because this girl was the future consort of His Highness. The boys were indignant, for they did not understand why they had to choose their expressions when talking about the Sylvanians, and if they were at war, they had to put up with these scoundrels. They were quieted by Tarkin, who asked if one of the boys had found out why the princess had been isolated, for she had said that if they searched a little, it would be easy to find the fact. Lowering his head, the man said that before the princess arrived, he had come to Tarkin to make a report, but the prince had said that it was good starter material and had burned it all up, and had threatened to say that if the lad wasted his time, he would waste it on firewood. This was his report, which he wrote diligently, for it was not fair that the prince should do that to him, for afterward he could not utter the letter P as it is in the word princess. Listening to the boy's indignation, Tarkin realized that it was indeed true, and asked him not to cry, for he might wet the carpet, and also told him not to delay news about her and to report to him at once. All the boys present were very surprised, for His Highness had changed his orders, and when they saw each other in life, he really liked the girl. Cockroach said that even though the war with the Empire was over, she was the most important key, so it would be good to know everything about the princess. He couldn't find General Mukali either. As it turned out, he had gone to the western front line on a survey to make arrangements for him to return through the main gate. But it looked like he hadn't gotten used to life in the palace. Tarkin, on the other hand, wanted to say something else, but suddenly paused. At this point, they were still in the process of negotiating with Sylvanus, but because they were discussing a peace treaty, they were too relaxed. Their opponents were much more persistent than the monsters, and the warriors were willing to accept any order from His Majesty and go through fire and water, overcoming even thorns. The prince, on the other hand, said to contact a cook skilled in making cakes, even if he was from another palace. This request made everyone even more surprised. The next morning, Arisina woke up not realizing how long she had slept, for it had been a long time since she had slept washed clean, in clean clothes, and on a stable bed. She didn't want to get out of bed because the blanket was very soft and made of sheep's wool. When she got up, she saw Tarkin sitting beside the bed. When asked what he was doing here, he answered that her husband didn't need a reason to come to his wife's bedroom. Arisina didn't expect him to have free time and said that he should have just woken her up instead of waiting, because he probably had a lot to do. He was about to wake her up when he got to Arisina's house, first waiting outside, and for the first time waiting for someone to wake up, not realizing how she could sleep for so long. Though the Sylvanian was very small, and she must have been tired after the long journey, after which he decided to go to the training ground. Close to noon, he got busy with his work report and all such things. Even though everyone was awake, the princess hadn't gotten up yet. While he was waiting for her, her maids offered to have a cup of tea with them before she awoke. He realized that these ladies were the same companions that had taunted the princess when she first arrived in Irugo. The day came, and the princess had not risen, and Tarkin was confronted by court ladies who unnaturally blocked the way, and he burst into the sleeping lady's room, seeing the sleeping bride. Looking at Aristina, he was embarrassed, because a man who looks at a sleeping girl is not able to wake her up, which was quite a popular situation in movies. She assumed that Tarkin couldn't wake her up because she looked like an angel, and he was embarrassed, so he quietly snuck to the curtain of her bed and covered himself with tea and secretly looked at her. Despite the fact that Aristina respected that people have different tastes, asked him to refrain from exercising them on her. He then handed her an envelope of papers. There was a list of aristocrats who would be participating in the event of the delegation's arrival, and it was better for her to know their names before the afternoon audience with his father. Tarkin probably shouldn't have presented such information to the princess of an enemy nation, but he trusted her. She had to meet his expectations and said that they had to arrive not in advance but at the exact right time, otherwise they would run into the royal scions and be an eyesore to them. However, Aristina said that they needed time not for that, because there were things that needed to be taken care of before the audience. But first she offered them something to eat. Before the audience, the headmaid said that everyone should be introduced according to their titles, and there should be no mistakes, as this was a very important event. Then it was announced that His Highness Tarkin and Princess Aristina of Sylvanus had arrived with the delegation. They went there under the arm, and all the people of the palace were surprised to see the princess, because they realized that the rumors were false. They were welcomed by the king and also by the queen, who asked if the long journey was not too long for her, because she was worried because they had decided to use old-fashioned carriages instead of the portal. When Tarkin was 10, he was killed by the mercenaries, but they failed, so he was sent to the front to fight the monsters of the plains. That man was the queen. While his father was busy with foreign policy, the queen strengthened her position in the palace. The queen is supported by the conservative aristocrats who hold high positions, and on his side are the warriors and the new aristocracy that hold small positions. Despite 10-year-old Tarkin's talent with a sword, he was just a child in a field teeming with monsters, and he was sent there to his doom. The queen will not be afraid of any means to put her son Hamir on the throne. On the outside, she may appear to be affectionate, but if you dig deeper, she is not. When Arisina went to meet the king, the royal children praised her, knowing how dirty she was when she arrived, because the higher you fly, the harder it hurts to fall. She told the queen that she had traveled to stop the rivers of blood flowing in the war. So it didn't matter how hard the journey was, she couldn't be bothered. Because of the war, the commoners of both states suffered. Therefore, as a princess, she wanted to check with her own eyes. She saw the life of the people. And in comparison to it, the physical pain of the princess is insignificant. From everywhere there was talk that Emperor Sylvanus had brought up his daughter well, because Princess Sama had decided not to use the portal and was very kind-hearted. Count Escella intervened in the conversation, saying that apparently the princess wanted to show off her best side and then their ego and appeared in Arugo's outfit. Everyone noticed it only after his words, because they were so delighted that they did not notice neither weaves nor bows on Irugo's outfit, and did not understand why, because she had brought her own dresses. The count was the queen's father and Hamir's closest associate, but in fact, her maids had talked to her about it too, because she represented Sylvanus, and therefore she had to wear the dress the emperor had given her. But after a month on the road, the dress was soiled, and she could not wear it. The count went on to say that the king of Sylvanus was very arrogant because he had sent not only a tribute, but also a beautiful princess. And the princess, as part of the imperial family, understood everything perfectly. There were dozens of conversations around the girl, who talked about the fact that the Sylvanus had dared to attack Irugo and had even taken away part of the territory. That was why it was so important to send the princess. Some felt that they should have sent not the first princess who was in confinement, but the second, what is called the Jewel of the Empire. She realized that all these people were under the queen's command and were hostile to Tarkin. Just a few words, and they could cross the line as if they were just waiting for the moment. So she decided not to be silent and said, which was quite strange since the princess that stood before them was ending years of hostility between the states in order to establish peace. She came in a carriage and put on their attire, and they allowed themselves to say things that undermined the meaning of this peace, and it sounded as if they all wanted to start a war. The count, however, smiled tensely and said that the princess's speeches were very dangerous, and he could not afford such terms. After all, they had only recently signed a peace treaty. Esker realized that he had just almost gotten into trouble and was glad that they had cleared up the misunderstanding, because if he went any further, he could be accused of disobeying the king. He realized that the princess had nerves of steel, and he assumed that she would be trembling with fear like a common wench. However, she looked at him carefully, as if waiting for an answer. Arisa went on to say that her expectations of the count had been too high, and she had overestimated him. He was furious, because he didn't understand how she could estimate him, because this girl was nothing even without pedigree. He couldn't even guess what she was wearing, for it wasn't Irugo's outfit, but Sylvastian's Karelian silk. The maids advised the count to look closely, and then he would understand everything, because it was a pure red color that looked like warm ruby, and of course it was Karelian silk. Sylvanus was so proud of this silk that they named it after the country, and this Karelian silk was of the highest quality and was a pure shade of red. However, it was not part of Dany. It was a perfect idea, because the silk that Sylvanus was proud of was used to make Irugo's outfit. It was appropriate and symbolized the unity of the two countries. The girl realized that the count had fallen for his own trickery, and that she had received only one outfit from Emperor Sylvanus. But unfortunately it got dirty and shabby on the way. But these hyenas did not know it, so before the audience, she soon took a favor from Tarkin. They wouldn't have time to make a sylvan dress because it takes a long time to cut and sew. Luckily, you paid attention to the flowing shape in Irugo's clothes. The silhouette came out too simple, but by agreeing to embellish the dress with chains and fittings, it was finished quickly. She thought about mentally thanking the count for reacting the way she wanted. The king, who was watching the whole scene, said that only the princess was thinking about peace and the future of the two countries among them, and thinking that she was tired, offered her to sit down. A maid who was shaking with fear came to them and said that due to lack of chairs, there was nowhere to seat His Majesty Tarkin and the princess. The queen looked upset and said that it looked like the headmaid had made a mistake, saying that it was her fault because she was excited about the fact that the war was over and the old hostilities were no more. Arisa realized that it was all a lie and the queen was pretending that she was not to blame. However, the queen found a way out of the situation by pointing to the farthest free table. However, the matter was bad. All the servants understood that the queen wanted to put the couple at the most insignificant place of all, because there were places for servants. The queen saw nothing wrong in it, because they could no longer make people stand there as if they were being punished, and thought that they were just chairs, and should not be given much importance. And the princess was not so petty that she would destroy the peaceful atmosphere because of such a thing. Looking at the princess, the queen was extremely puzzled, because she didn't understand why she was so happy, because she had given them the farthest seat. She was frightened because she assumed that Arisa knew in advance that she had lured the headmaid to her side and had prepared to retaliate. Tarkin's instinct screamed that when the princess had that look on her face, something very dangerous was going on. Tarkin said that the reception had not yet begun, and the queen already looked intoxicated. Otherwise, she would not have put the princess in the most remote place, because the princess herself could be called a symbol of peace. And he could not believe that she would put such a person in the farthest and smallest place. All those present were surprised that His Majesty Tarkin had made himself known to the society. He was an eternal, silent young man, and it was all for the sake of the princess. The queen replied that that was not what she meant at all, for from the outside it would seem that they were making the princess stand because she had done something wrong, so she simply offered her a free chair. Cockroach replied that in that case, someone could give her a seat. After all, they were highly respected members of the royal family of Arugo. He believed with all his soul that for the sake of peace, they could vacate just one chair. The third Prince Martin, the same age as Tarkin, who was very afraid of him, rose from his seat and said that for the sake of the beautiful princess, he would of course give up his seat. However, Aristina said that this was not enough and they had to go together, as husband and wife should be side by side. She realized that her business partner was trying hard for her. They had come this far, so it was impossible to let Tarkin sit at a distance. She went to one of the princesses who had been mocking her the most. Stelina didn't know whether to give up her seat right now, because that was how she could save her honor. But to her surprise, the princess passed her by and went to Annika, saying that since she and Tarkin would be a married couple, they should sit next to each other. Their marriage contract was a symbol of peace, plus Annika said she was extremely excited about their wedding. Annika realized that asking to sit in someone else's seat also had political overtones, but there was no point in touching the empty seat, because her goal was to be the most powerful member of the royal family in the absence of the first principle of peace. And she realized that no one would want to give way to a fool like Princess Aristina. However, the king intervened in the conversation, saying that Annika had a bad leg and it was better for her to sit on a comfortable table. But the princess did not expect the king to intervene. Aristina realized that Princess Annika was the king's main favorite, so in this situation, she should not expect him to take her side. So the second princess got out of it and said that she really wanted to give up her seat, but unlike the others, she had a frail constitution and a leg problem, so she couldn't do it. The king said that the servants should have brought them free chairs instead, because husband and wife had to sit together, and ordered to put the chairs right next to him and the queen. The earl was indignant, for it was a place for the crown prince, for in a royal family there should be lawful order. However, the king laughed and said that they were just chairs, and they would just put them on the empty seats, and there was nothing to be done because the queen had mistaken the number of seats. At that moment, not only the people supporting the queen, but also the neutral aristocrats balancing between the two forces, were deeply astonished. Nobody expected that the situation would change so much, and now Prince Tarkin, who had avoided political decisions before, has taken the lead, and the queen has been pushed aside. Moreover, the princess was in the center of all these events. Having gone upstairs, she could see the whole hall, and everything looked very small from above. Tarkin asked who the princess was always looking out at the end of the hall. But when she didn't want to tell him, he said that if it wouldn't cause any problems, he didn't care. Aristina once again looked to the end of the hall, where she saw the same man she had seen through the Emperor's eye. A month ago, on her way from Sylvanus to Irugo, she had seen the future while she was getting water. In her vision, she had a private conversation with this guy, promising that he would become the best, not only in this country, but in the entire continent. He was to become the best blacksmith. That was the end of her vision, and to be honest, she was a little surprised to see such a picture of a bride-to-be in this country. Because at first, the image looked like a scene from an immoral novel, yet they had met so unexpectedly at a banquet. With a glance at the blacksmith, she realized that that man would be the main workforce in her business plan, and she wanted to talk to him right now. But since she had already made quite a ruckus today, it would be better to sit quietly for the rest of the feast. She looked at the blacksmith again and was surprised that his hand was fine, because in the future, she had seen that he had no thumb on his right hand. But she still didn't know what the relationship between them was, and why she was so confident in her words about him becoming the best blacksmith in this country. She would want to prevent his injury before it was too late. For an injury to a blacksmith's hand was fatal, for she was sure there was a way to save the hand of a man who would be loyal to her. She planned to find out all the information about him as soon as the banquet was over. But now she was distracted by the insanely delicious food, which had never seemed so wonderful to her before. Then she was served a jelly frin-fran, and the girl was happy because the sweet and sour flavor of the jelly really exploded in her mouth like firecrackers, and she ate it all in a flash. Tarkin, who was sitting next to her, pushed his bowl of jelly away from her and said that she could eat it if she wanted to. Everyone else watching the couple thought they looked great together and chatted very nicely. And some of them even wanted to try to make conversation with the princess after the banquet. Diona didn't understand how their relationship could change in an instant, and why she was the only one who should feel awkward. But she was already very much worried about Mr. Tarkin, because his future wife was interested in another man. After the official meeting between Irugo and Silvanus, Tarkin's gloomy palace was lively for the first time in a long time, and many people were discussing the newly arrived princess. This was not only because of the fact that Princess Silvanus turned out to be elegant and beautiful, but also because of the incident in which the queen was humiliated. Irugo produces a large amount of quality steel, and if she could combine the blacksmith she had found with Irugo's metallurgy, her business would be a success. At the same time, she could fulfill the king's wish to get rid of the stigma of a barbarian country. One of the maids happily announced that the princess's wedding dress would be made using sylvan fabric and Irugo's traditions as they had been at the banquet. She was also given several designer-designed sketches for her to choose how her wedding dress would look. The girl, however, said she would just wear whatever they made for her. One of the maids said that this was not the way to do it, and her personal opinion was that she did not like the dress made in the tradition of Irugo. Rosalind rushed to her defense, asking how she dared to speak so disrespectfully of Her Highness the Princess, to make fun of her accomplishments, and to continue to call herself her careerist. The maids were always fighting amongst themselves because they didn't have enough time for the princess, and Irugo's residents were switched nights. She also ate well and slept well, perhaps because of her surroundings, but the dessert she had eaten earlier seemed to be even more delicious. One of the maids finally chased away the court ladies, saying that the wedding was a one-time thing, and the princess's opinion was very important because she asked what she wanted. And even if it was something insignificant, they were ready to do anything. Aristina said that she wanted something soft to keep her warm and comfortable to sleep in. The maids were delighted and went off to find something suitable, happy that the princess and Tarkin would definitely sleep together and snuggle. At the same time, in the hallway, Rosalind continued her argument, along with a fight with another maid. However, they were interrupted by General Mukali saying that he would like to visit the princess. The maids realized that this was one of the closest people to Prince Tarkin. He did have a terrible scar on his face. Rumor had it that he intimidated the soldiers with his monstrous physique. Now Mukali realized that the Sylvanians were very cowardly, which meant Diona had not thrown words to the wind, and the princess was the same. Diona's brother Santra was a dedicated warrior, so much so that he was ready to sacrifice his life for their sake. He was a loyal and handsome young man, and before his death he asked to take care of his sister. When Diona told him this, he thought he had misunderstood, because according to her it seemed that the princess, who would soon be married, already had another man's interest. The man was ready to find proofs of it and reveal the truth, because he felt sorry for Tarkin in case it was true. There's a famous experiment called Pavlov's dog. It consists in that if before each meal to strike a bell, only at the sight of the bell, the dog will release saliva. Though Aristina was not a dog, she realized that if Tarkin came to her, tea would soon be served. And if tea was brought, desserts would come along with it. She wondered what they would bring today, and with what kind of tea. But in fact, if you ask the servants, this question could be easily solved. But because in Aristina's mind this area was Tarkin's property, she thought it would be very rude to ask someone to grant her wish. When Tarkin ascends to the throne, she will finally be free from the danger of being killed by her father's mercenary, Emperor Silvanus. And with her capital, she would be able to confidently purchase whatever she wanted to eat. Before he entered the princess's room, Tarkin overheard her saying that she would like to sleep on something soft, and frightened, he said he would not do that to her, and ran away embarrassed. Arisina did not understand why everyone was so strange today. At the same time, a maid came to her to bring her tea and thought she was too late, since the prince had already left. Today, they brought her apricot jam and strawberry compote and a cake with melted cream. It was double luck for Aristina as there were 2 servings. But before she could eat, the maids burst in and said that she had a visitor who called himself General Mukali and insisted on bringing him to her. The princess didn't even know who Mukali was. The maids explained that he was as close to Prince Tarkin as Durant. This ruthless man was terribly frightening to the Sylvanian. Walking into her room, Mukali noticed that she was small, and assumed that now she, like everyone else, would be stunned and then scream. Though he was disgusted by this reaction, but today his scar would play into his hands because he had come to warn the princess. However, to his surprise, the princess was genuinely happy and smiling. Plus, she didn't wrinkle her nose at the sight of his scar. He used his most formidable tone and came in all arms, saying that he heard that she was asking about the other man. The girl, however, smilingly said it was true and offered him a seat, asking her maids to bring the general some tea. She remembered how Tarkin at the banquet had asked her why she was interested in that man and why she was looking at him so closely. And she couldn't tell him and only answered that it was a business secret. But in order to find out more about him, she had to join forces with Tarkin because she had no support here. But after the reception, Tarkin had become very grumpy, so she had no choice but to ask the servants. But her inquiries were not fruitful. Sitting at the table with the princess, the general did not understand how it happened that he ate delicate cakes together with the girl Thumbelina. Aristina asked him if he could help her to find a man, and without noticing it, the general fell for the princess and did not understand why he should help her to find a man. In any case, if he agreed, how was he different from the courtiers and warriors who made a fuss over the arrival of the princess? Did she really think that if she made everyone reveal secrets, she could control Arugo as she wished, and he was going to make her realize reality? Addressing her rather rudely, he noticed her confused look on her face. However, he suddenly stopped, for he had an annoying feeling. His intuition that always saved him on the battlefield told him that he shouldn't be angry now, so he decided to pretend to help her and then catch her red-handed, which would be irrefutable proof, and in that case, no words could save her. Aristina went on to say that she was thinking about what to do, for now her freedom of action was very limited and she could not send the maids away and go out alone to meet a man. Even though the maids had told her everything and she had a list with all the details, she did not know much about him, like what he liked or what he was interested in. After these words, General Mukali realized that Diona was right, but he did not understand why his mood had changed so much because he had found out her secret, which should have given him satisfaction. He asked how she could leave their prince. The girl answered that it was not that, because that man had other talents and excellent physical shape, unlike Tarkin. Mukali did not believe that His Majesty was in bad physical shape, and was not going to listen to this nonsense any further. Arisina noticed that Mukali was not consistent in his decisions. He belonged to that class of people who considered their commander to be the strongest man in the world. And though she didn't want to say it, she only needed a little embellishment. So she said cheerfully that she thought Tarkin was an excellent partner who was not inferior even physically. The general was completely shocked because they were not married yet, but their relationship was developing very quickly. After all, before such little girls like this, Thumbelina had to be fed 7 times a day, and he did not understand how you can touch her. Arisina said that the boy was a blacksmith and Tarkin a warrior, but that didn't mean he was better than Tarkin, for there were many excellent blacksmiths in Arugo, and she needed one. She didn't want to tell him that she needed a blacksmith, but since Mukali had been sent by Tarkin, it shouldn't be hard to digest that information. She had said this so that Arugo would be able to withstand the endlessly increasing number of monsters, for an outstanding blacksmith should forge an even more outstanding sword. Arugo is unrivaled in metallurgy and metal smelting. Such a magnificent art bears witness to the history of the battles in Arugo and the monsters of the Great Plain. Mukali didn't think Princess Sylvanusa knew such facts, so he would be surprised that she was aware. She had also heard that Arugo's sword could cut through a monster's hide with a single blow. The man smiled and boasted that if you put an aura on the sword, it could cut through bones as only a sword made by them could withstand such a load. Although it was incredible, the Sylvanians were squealing that their ancient swords were barbaric, saying that they wore decorative swords like children's toys. Arisina replied that the Sylvanians knew that Arugo's famous sword was incredibly good, but they just didn't want to admit it. They were all terribly narcissistic. Mukali didn't realize what he was doing, but he convinced himself that he was just pretending to be nice to the princess, to get closer to her, and then capture her at the scene of the crime, because that was his strategy. Looking at the man with interest, the princess asked if he also had a glorified sword, to which the guy proudly pulled it out of its sheath. In addition, it could be said that Mukali's sword was the longest of all. It was the size of Arisina, so even when pulling it out of its sheath, strong wind currents would form. The captain realized that this was the end because it was the princess. Even if she poked her finger at him and called him a barbarian, he couldn't do anything against her. He realized that if it was seen from the outside, they would think that he was a bandit who tortures the little princess or intimidates her with his weapon. Jacqueline grudgingly warned him not to take it out of its sheath, for he said that whatever his intentions, his appearance might make him seem intimidating, and he thought that the girl would shriek in fright. His original plan had been to frighten the princess, but he honestly didn't want to do that now. All he wanted to do was show her his favorite weapon. However, he realized that was it. And now, he wouldn't even be able to talk to the princess about the sword. However, to his surprise, after a few moments the girl looked at the sword with curiosity, realizing that it was very polished and could be looked at in the same way as in a mirror, and admired such a clear pattern, because she had never seen such large swords up close. The man was very surprised at her reaction, for in the war with Sylvanus, he had constantly received taunts, though they did not embarrass or shame him, no matter what anyone said. The scar was a symbol of his victory in the fierce battle. However, there was really nothing he could do about the disgust shown towards him. At first, even Diona had flinched at the sight of him, and when every time he appeared he began to fear and cry. He realized it all, for he could not be around the small and defenseless. So he thought that the little princess would also immediately swallow her tongue with fear. But at first, he could not find any fear or disgust in her eyes, but only an attitude of treating him as an ordinary person, and the eyes staring at him with curiosity and not the look of a researcher, as if to say that his scar didn't change anything, and she was only concerned about his sword. He wondered why she was asking how to deal with rust when the girl was the princess of Sylvanus. But he explained that he took care of it twice a day, morning and evening, and though it took a lot of effort, he did it because it was worth his care. The girl asked to touch the sword. Mukali agreed, but warned her to be careful not to hurt herself, because it was very sharp, so she could only hurt herself by touching it. Arisina learned a lot of new things for herself. As it turned out, the captain talks a lot when he talks about his sword, and it was obvious that he really loves it. And before she learned everything only through the eye of the emperor, and now it is a very interesting experience. But then the girl realized that it was as if she had forgotten something important, and suddenly exhaled startling Mukali, who thought that there was danger around. But the girl just suddenly rushed towards the table and said that their tea was cold. Mukali did not understand her reaction, because she could have just asked the maids to bring a new one. She thought that she was concentrating too much on his story and had forgotten the important things, but that was because the dialogue was too interesting. Then the captain said that in that case she could have tea at his house and invited her to visit him, in response to which the girl gladly agreed, because at last she could go to visit and leave her house. When she was in confinement, she could not even dream of such a thing, and she did not know what to do when she went to visit, because she had heard that one should not go empty-handed, but she was upset because she had nothing. Then the girl said that she would take some cookies with her, and Mukali was surprised for the umpteenth time, for he had just remembered His Majesty's strange recent decree about cookies and pastry. Aristina did not know that she had sown another doubt in the captain. Time passed, and finally the day came for the wedding of Aristina and Tarkin. The maids were scrambling to get everything ready in time. They were checking if the breakfast was ready, and if they had checked the rooms for the newlyweds, when they were informed that the carriage had arrived. The girls were happy and thrilled that their hands were able to do such a thing, because in their life makeup, artists thought that they would never create such beauty again. It was a great honor for them to help the princess to dress up, though they had seen her during the fitting, but they thought that now she was inimitable and beautiful. They thought that His Highness Tarkin should see her in such a marvelous form as soon as possible, and said that it was time to go out, for her carriage was already ready. The maids who had come with her from home were worried that the outfit would be detrimental to the greatness of their empire, for it was true what they said about dressing for the occasion. And in her platinum chain, they saw many diamonds, as well as a precious diamond flower of mother-of-pearl buttercup, and the rest of the maids said that there was no need to assign any onerous role to the high-ranking ladies and decided to become bridesmaids themselves. They also said that because they woke up at dawn today, they must be very tired and offered a cup of sweet tea, because fatigue was bad for beauty, and the pearl carriage had already been prepared. By the way, Tarkan's maids were very clever. They noticed at once that her maids were careless and arrogant, but it was hard for ordinary maids to oppose aristocratic ladies. However, Mr. Mukali's visit could have been a trigger because after his visit, they started doing the work of maids, and though she was grateful to them, the decision to stand up against the aristocrats was not easy for them. One of the maids told her that the people of Irugo used to be in a constant state of anxiety, for the longer the war with Sylvanus lasted, the more absent Mr. Tarkin, the protector of their meadow, was. As a result, they were unprepared to face the monster lands. Others pretended to be calm, but inside they trembled with anxiety because they did not know when the monsters might invade. And so here the princess became a symbol of hope and peace for them who were in a similar position. The girl understood all the worries of the people of Arogo because Sylvanus could use her zeal to make Arogo a laughingstock, and she realized that her father had acted in an immature manner. One of the knights met her at the carriage and told her that she looked completely different. Until she washed and dressed up, even the first princess became a beauty. Then he gave her his hand and asked her permission to escort her. But the girl just walked past him because she realized that he was not worth her ceremony, after which the other knights began to laugh at him, and he did not understand how she dared to embarrass him in front of the others. He was outraged that these savages dared to bully him, but why didn't they know they should be grateful when they had such a handsome and high-ranking knight in front of them? The girl exhaled, although the lower-ranked knight had already gotten what he deserved, but this one still couldn't settle down. After the marriage ceremony was over, most of the delegation would leave, but a few knights from the guards would remain, and this guy was one of them. She realized that one day this news would reach the emperor's ears. She was worried that one day the emperor would find out that she was not bullied according to his order, so she needed to deal with the knights quickly. She arrived at the wedding palace, where there were newspapermen everywhere, and although the ceremony was far from over, the atmosphere was lively. The three men closest to His Majesty, General Durant, General Mukali, and the strategist Jacquelina, entered there. The maids noticed Diona, who had always gone with them before, and were surprised that the girl greeted them first, complimenting her and saying that she was charming and joking that she might be prettier than the princess. However, she felt that she shouldn't have said such a thing at Mr. Cockroach's wedding, and when they met the princess, they would realize that she was much prettier. The surrounding aristocrats were surprised to hear that Diona was going to go to the bride's room to see the princess. The girl explained that the princess had arrived in the unfamiliar lands of Arogo, so she would be lonely and uncomfortable here. They had met her on the first day. Besides, of all the girls, she was only familiar with her. The lady courtiers were surprised, for the fact that the first princess had called Lady Diona herself said that the girl knew about the relationship between Lady Diona and His Majesty Tarkin. After the war, Tarkin and his inner circle returned to the capital. Many ladies started to circle around His Highness, but in the end, they all had to give up, because he had the perfect girl Diona by his side. Not to forget the Palaman family, as her brother Chandra's fame was still on everyone's lips. The only lady Tarkan had allowed to be near him, but because of royal orders, the relationship had not borne fruit. That was the assessment of Irugo's high society. The court ladies realized that from Lady Diona's point of view, it was only a political marriage, so they tried to think that there was nothing to be done and did not understand how the Princess of Sylvanus dared to dress up in a wedding dress and call Lady Diona. They supported Lady Diona with all their souls, realizing that it was not about her at all, and did not know what to do if the princess insulted such a kind person. Diona did not understand why they had so abruptly deprived her of support. But after listening to their words, she said that now she really had to go, and she was very happy to talk to them, standing in front of the waiting room for the newlyweds, where he remembered that since childhood she had imagined herself sitting behind that door, but she could not do anything about the royal order. Unfortunately, political marriages are not uncommon among aristocrats, and knocking Aristina allowed her to enter. When Diona entered the room, she realized that in order to hide her emotions, she had lowered her head without noticing, and noticed that the princess had become even more beautiful since their last meeting. She decided to keep her emotions under control, and she was sure she could, because even when it was cold, Tarkin's indifference pierced her soul like thorns. Even when she thought she was shattering, she always kept a smile on her face. So she told the princess that she had come to congratulate the two of them on their wedding, and added that they were perfect for each other. Looking at the princess's absolutely calm reaction, Diona was surprised that she was acting like that, because she realized that during the banquet, she didn't look like a person lacking courage. But she continued by saying that she and Tarkin had grown up together because His Highness's mother was very close to her mother, and therefore the relationship between their families was also great. The same was true between her brother and His Highness Tarkin. However, she added in her thoughts that they had been in an extremely special relationship from the very beginning, and it was a relationship that would not become strange even after the wedding, for she had realized this during their first meeting. She went on to tell the princess that when she visited the royal palace as a child, Tarkin's mother had showered her with her love, and His Highness had always taken care of her, and hoped that the princess had gone through the same thing. Initially, His Highness Tarkin did not let any lady near him because of his coldness, but since they had known each other for a long time, it was different. Aristina tried to sit quietly and not interrupt her speech, but as it turned out, listening to someone bragging about their boyfriend was hopelessly boring. She didn't care if Diona was in a special relationship with her business partner Tarkin, or if she was his lover. She only cared if this relationship would be her bargaining chip in future negotiations. In fact, divorce was a card she could play after Tarkin became the last prince, and she ruined Emperor Sylvanus' plans. But she realized that this conversation was still a long way off. Aristina realized that it would be hard to survive in society if she reacted in any way to the boastful story about the boy. But she noticed that Diona was suddenly speaking more caustically. The girl had told her that she really couldn't imagine her marriage to His Highness Tarkin, but she said that there was no implication that such a marriage was possible, because Irogo and Sylvanus had been enemies for a long time. Aristina noticed that she felt a familiar sense of hostility from her, and though the girl was quick to get out of her own way, it made her uneasy with each new word. Diona went on to say that originally, a wedding was considered a love union between a man and a woman, but this time the wedding was arranged for the sake of peace, and it should be a success. Before leaving, the Emperor's eye awakened a memory in Aristina of her father, the Emperor of Sylvanus, telling her that when he had everything ready, he would send her a sign and gave her a small vial, telling her to drink it when she got it, and if she didn't get it, she was to give it to Tarkin. The girl told Diona that she was grateful for her words, and that she intended to live in a successful marriage as she wished, and also that she was of the general opinion that this wedding was not an ordinary union between a man and a woman, but only a union for the sake of peace. In the common room, a number of ladies were talking, and one of them said that she had some news about Lady Diona, which she would like to tell. General Durant and Mukali, who were passing by, listened to this conversation, and Durant decided to go away for a few minutes to hear the end of the conversation, for he was very interested. Durant, who was waiting for His Highness Tarkin, said that he would go somewhere before meeting His Highness. Although it was bad, but in his case, such behavior was normal, and again, Mukali got all the lumps. People thought he had a bad temper, but it was Durant who was actually responsible for the madness. Diona was angry because in her opinion, Aristina could really drive her crazy, if she meant that it was not just a marriage, but a union of a higher order. But she was wrong, because she was the fate of Tarkin. The fateful first meeting, she was next to him in the most difficult periods of his life. The death of his brother made their relationship even stronger. In addition, she is in a close relationship with the union of the three. However, she too believed that this marriage was an unusual union of a man and a woman, a pact of peace in all conditions. Diona realized that it was just a marriage ending hundreds of years of fighting, a grand wedding union for peace, a wedding which attracts the attention of the whole world, only because it is the union of Aristina and Tarkin. She realized that once it came to the wedding, there was no turning back. Then she would never let Aristina get his love. Aristina noticed that Diona had a very strange look on her face and thought that she had overreacted because social life is very hard. When the door started to open, Diona thought that the maids were back and she was angry because she had not yet shown the princess her place. But Durant came through the door and greeted Her Highness, saying that the ceremony would begin soon and asking if she was having trouble getting ready. Diona was surprised that he followed the official warrior etiquette of the royal family and called Her Highness. It sounded strange to Aristina so far, and since there was no problem, she told him to stand up, noting that they hadn't talked in a long time. The girl didn't know how much he knew, because Durant was not as easy to deal with as Mukali, and one wrong word, and she was finished. Aristina intervened and said that the girl had come to congratulate her on the wedding and wish them a good marriage. Durant was curious about what they were talking about, and Diona tried to justify herself by saying that there was nothing interesting in their conversation. Aristina was stunned to hear her glib assertion, which could only be made by someone who didn't know what they were talking about. Usually, listeners do not ask about the lovers of which the storytellers are proud, because it is not interesting. Such stories are interesting only to the narrator. Besides, if during the story your pofagism will rise, the narrator will notice it and will be very angry. Anyway, it is quite a tiresome topic. Well, it couldn't be helped because the guy was interested. Besides, she thought that two listeners were much better than one, and pointed to Diona saying that this was her opportunity, and she could continue to share her pride. When the girl stammered and began to say that the princess had misunderstood, Aristina noticed that she had become more timid when there was another listener and didn't understand the reason. Diona said that she didn't mean anything like that, but was just proud of the relationship she and Tarkin had as children. And Aristina added that the girl had mentioned that Tarkin's mother valued him a lot. However, she realized that it was awkward to say Diona's words on her own, as there were a lot of details, and decided to say in a nutshell that Tarkin and Diona are in an extremely strong relationship, as she told her, after which she congratulated her on her wedding. She also said that their marriage was nothing but a union for peace, so it had to be successful. After which Aristina noticed that Diona became very frightened under Durant's gaze, and didn't understand why she had said the purpose of her visit. Normally, a noisy conversation with a daughter-in-law about her fiancé would be a great excuse for a slap, but Tarkin had a special case. They had decided that they would live as business partners bound by a political marriage. She thought it was Tarkin who thought Diona was special, and Diona knew and was proud of the relationship. But looking at them, she realized that apparently it wasn't true. The princess decided to take Diona's side, because if she did it now, she could play that card for Tarkin in the future, and told Durant that nothing special had happened this time. Aristina looked at the guy and realized that for some reason, Durant didn't have a face on him, and remembered that when they first met, she had asked him to tell only the truth. So she wouldn't scold him either, and asked him to believe her by saying that she was really okay. Then the man exhaled with relief, and said that in that case, he was leaving them, and congratulated her on her upcoming wedding, saying that he had congratulated her first. Diona realized that she was done for, because she had never seen Durant so angry, and was about to leave when Aristina stopped her and asked if she had thought about saying goodbye. She hoped she was done praising her boyfriend, and Diona didn't know where to hide from her, because she was pretending to be a master of torture. But she didn't answer anything, and just ran away from the room with all possible speed, which Aristina was even glad of, because she was finally free from the inconvenience. Diona was already running down the hallway trying to catch up with Durant so that he would listen to her. But she didn't want to talk in the hall because everyone was watching and suggested that they talk somewhere else. After they left, she began to explain that he had misunderstood her. She wanted to offer the princess her help for her own well-being in her marriage to the Tarkin. After all, it was better to let her know in advance what Tarkin didn't like. She had told the princess about their childhood to explain how she knew his tastes, and didn't expect the princess to take it the wrong way. Durant interrupted her explanation to ask what it had to do with him, because there was more truth in her actions than in her words, and he didn't need her explanation. Diona realized that if he knew, he had to support her, to take her side. But their conversation was interrupted by General Mukali, who was looking for him everywhere and was confused as to why Diona was crying. He rushed to the girl, hugging her, trying to calm her down, asking why Durant was being so rude to Diona. However, the guy was just giving his opinion. Durant asked Diona to remember his words because he didn't care how she behaved with the princess, but if she knocked His Highness out of line, she knew the consequences. Durant's name had a different meaning. He would kill anyone who got in His Highness's way. Diona continued to cry on Mukali's shoulder, saying that she thought of him as her own brother. However, she felt that Tarkana didn't think of her as a sister in return, to which the boy soothingly said that it wasn't about her. He just had a hard temper and actually valued her. Diona knew that it wasn't like that before and didn't understand what had changed, and said that she had no idea that the princess had told Durant about him, but immediately stopped herself from saying that she had misspoken and asked him to forget about it. Mukali thought about it when he heard that the princess was involved, because if he thought about it, Durant had mentioned her too, and if it was about her, he would have listened to her story. The maids were talking among themselves about little things, such as the silk of the princess's dress, for it would have to be carefully lowered when she entered the hall, when she would go on the red carpet, and she would have to avoid the newspaper men at ease, for which purpose it was necessary to bow at an angle of 45 degrees. The ceremony finally started. The clicks of the cameras were like the flapping of a bird's wing, and each of the newspaper men tried to take as many pictures as possible and as fast as possible when the bride came out. Aristina realized that if she followed their sounds, at the end she would be waiting for this wonderful man, and maybe because of the camera flashes, but just for a moment, and it seemed as if there was a feeling in his eternally indifferent eyes. They listened to the speech of the priest, who said that this marriage was not just a union between a man and a woman. It marked the end of a long struggle between Sylvanus and Irugo. With the help of their marriage, peace and harmony was established in the two countries, and he hoped that the divine good would be with them. The noblewomen looked at the couple and discussed that no matter how beautiful the princess was, but because of her origin, she was small and unattractive, they were even ashamed to compare her with Lady Dina. They didn't understand what would happen to His Majesty Tarkin's or Lady Diona's relationship. Would they really be bound by such ties, and hoped that His Highness Tarkin would not just abandon her? When the priest asked them to exchange vows, Aristina noticed that Tarkin was nervous, but the vows were a standard part of the marriage vows, and she also remembered that she had been told that he would be emotional on the wedding day because he had been shy before. She realized that the more time passed, the more his shyness grew, and she had to calm him down. So she took his hand and told him that it was okay, and that it was just a state of touching certain parts of his body, and that he shouldn't be embarrassed because it was no big deal. For the girl, the kiss did not have any special meaning only because it was just a touching of body parts. It was a normal touch similar to the way she was holding his hand, and the kiss was absolutely no different. Newspaper reporters who watched their kiss thought that Mr. Tarkin's lips were saying that he would take care and love her alone for the rest of his life, because this story started with a marriage of convenience and ended with true love. The unexpected reaction of the people was overly fervent. On the other hand, the Queen and Count Skila looked at her with such hatred, as if they would tear her apart. After a vow kiss, they left the wedding site. But the wedding celebration did not end there. As the wedding parade began, the event through which the people would learn of the wedding having traveled all the way, the celebration would be completed. She knew that the king had also headed to Tarkan's palace along the main road, but she was surprised to see so many people in the streets all rejoicing at their wedding, and she had also heard that the princess had arrived in an old-fashioned carriage to see how people were suffering because of the war. They were delighted and very glad, for though she had traveled so long freely, they asked her not to work too hard, for she was the girl who had brought them peace. Aristina's heart fluttered madly, for she had never met the people officially before. She saw their mouths wide open, their eyes curved in a crescent moon, and the expression of happiness on their faces. Seeing so many smiling people without realizing it, she too broke into a smile. She looked at Tarkin and noticed that he had been strange from the beginning, but now it was as if he was completely lost in himself and looked even more fierce than usual. Turning to him, she asked him to smile, because in front of her and in front of him were people who appreciated and loved him. It would be better to smile too, because now he looked too strict. She explained that since she was his business partner, Their destinies in politics were linked. At the celebration, the queen's eyes were bloodshot, so much so that she wanted to pick on them. But it was better to show that they had a good relationship. Tarkin realizes that this was the only reason, because he thought that the wedding did not cause any emotions in the girl. She felt fine, he, on the contrary, but still agreed to smile. The circle on the royal road holds the hope that the couple will live together until death do not separate. That's why Aristina was going to divorce after Tarkin ascends the throne. And although this parade had no meaning nevertheless, like the living people of Irugo, it is a peace treaty. Suddenly, the coachman noticed that one side of the carriage was moving sideways because of a broken carriage mount, and the horses became agitated and quickened their pace. Aristina realized that the carriage could have crashed to the ground, but it was nothing to be afraid of. She was used to the pain, because patience had become her habit. She realized that, to her surprise, it didn't hurt. She felt a hot hand on her skin, which was both familiar and unfamiliar, because it had happened before. The princess knew that Tarkin was quite strong, but she didn't expect him to be able to stop the carriage with his legs, and didn't realize how much strength he had in him. They were surrounded by guards. The knights hoped that their highness was well, and also demanded to strengthen the perimeter defenses. Thanks to Tarkin, the girl was unhurt and uninjured, but it was bad as the horses had escaped and the carriage was broken, which meant the wedding parade was disrupted. Her role as a business partner was to secure the marriage and increase Tarkin's political status. So she asked him to order a new carriage to be delivered as soon as possible. The girl explained that a parade was a celebration where they prayed for the happy life of the newlyweds. She didn't know how it was at a regular wedding, but their marriage was a sign of the peaceful union between Arugo and Sylvanus. And as superstitious as it may seem, to people who have just signed peace treaties, the occasion may seem ominous, which would make them uneasy about the fragility of the agreement. After all, the Queen's faction would make the public believe it, because the Queen's men were ready to ridicule and attack Tarkin in any way they could, because he asked for a new carriage before it was too late. But Tarkin firmly refused and said that he would not ask for a carriage because he knew very well the methods of the Queen, as she would delay the carriage in any way, and thus would delay, and would send the carriage only in an extreme situation, as an intervention of His Majesty. But this carriage would not be solemn, but on the contrary, old and shabby, so that they would feel the embarrassment of the crowd looking on. Hearing the conversations going on in the crowd, Aristina said that no matter how long it took, she would rather wait than not finish the wedding order, as she wanted to fulfill the hopes and expectations of the people. The people were already discussing the unexpectedly overturned carriage. Some of them already thought that everything was over, and they realized it at the moment when the Sylvans started to ask for trouble themselves. They only felt sorry for Mr. Tarkin. Many people believed in superstitions because they thought that they did not need the Sylvanians to investigate the monsters, because in their time they attacked the garbage before dawn, and after dawn they defended the borders. Suddenly, however, the people were frightened, for it seemed to be a monster, but it was not a monster, though for a moment it could be mistaken for one. It was stronger and more powerful than the others, but in reality, it was a huge black stallion clad in armor, imitating horns. Tarkin explained that this was his warhorse with whom they had come together through many battles. For the people of Erugo, the next most important thing after the sword is the warhorse, especially if it is the warhorse with which Tarkin went through the war. There was no better one for the role of a ceremonial carriage, but she answered confusedly that she did not know how to ride a horse. The Snow-White princess in the arms of the god of war and protector Irugo. The wedding parade ended with the loudest cheers of happiness ever. The townspeople were delighted at the sight of Mr. Tarkin and the famous warhorse. There were many newspaper headlines, one of which was, "Love Story of His Highness's Princess Rescue." One of the townspeople gave an interview in which she said that Mr. Tarkin did not let the princess out of his arms for a second, which was very solid and poignant. The author of the article entitled "Love Like Fireworks" has already been nominated for the Journalist of the Year award, because the creator of this photo said that he put it as a family heirloom and will pass it from generation to generation. The Queen was angry because she did not understand how a person who wrote such a thing in a newspaper could be called a journalist and did not understand why they called the wedding of this bastard so. She was indignant that the wedding procession had reached its destination, but she had deliberately invented various excuses for delaying the carriage, and as it turned out, it was all in vain, because on the contrary, she only received a displeased look from the king. He had noticed that there had been a lot of problems in the palace lately, and he had not paid any attention to the palace, which meant that he would now take his place. Count Skila tried to calm her down by saying that the problem was not only in the growing popularity of the prince among the people and the displeased look of the king, but also in the disposition of the nobles. After all, when it was decided to make a political marriage with the Princess of Silvanus, almost no one changed their position. It cannot be said that after the banquet, the prince did not strengthen his position by demonstrating his political skill. The queen was angry because she didn't understand how those who used to follow them dared to compare them to Tarkin. But she realized that he had changed, and it was all because of the arrival of that girl. Princess Annika burst in on them and said that they had to look at a recent article. It said that His Highness Tarkin and Her Highness Princess had such a hot wedding night that they broke the beds. And there was also a photo of the broken bed saved by the journalist. But to find out if such an incident was true, it was necessary to go back in time to the evening after the wedding parade, when the young husband and wife went to bed together on their wedding night. As the maids prepared the princess for the evening, they wondered how the girl kept her skin so soft and smooth, for it was as if she made no effort but radiated light. Aristina was just about to fall asleep, but the maids forbade her to do so, for they thought she would need her strength for the night. It was her first wedding night, and they thought she was worried sick. The princess did not understand why she should be worried, because they were just business partners and thought only about getting to a soft bed and sleep. Then the girls brought a rack of clothes to her and told her that she had to wear it because it was Mr. Tarkin's choice. When His Highness was shown catalogs of women's undergarments, his gaze lingered on it for a few seconds longer. It was said that he looked through everything else at the speed of light and could be said to have been chosen by the maids. But they thought that it would be beautiful for her because she was called a fairy, and black and white colors suited her, and because of that, the palace maids were divided into two groups. Aristina had heard about the unrestrained preparations for the wedding, but did not expect them to go asking Tarkin what to choose, realizing that they were professional perverts. Still, she told them to bring her a different outfit, something more comfortable, and told them not to get so hung up on lingerie next time. Standing in the fresh air, Tarkin realized that this was their first night together, and he was anxious, for he had not expected this marriage to leave his gut in such disarray. The maids had unnecessarily given him reports on everything down to his costume, and they had caused him to have nothing but idle thoughts in his head. He didn't think he could do it with someone he didn't love or didn't like, because from the first time he met her until now, Aristina had seemed strange to him. As she walked toward him through the hall, he certainly thought that it was his soul that had given this child all it could. But he realized that if he stayed with her, he would find it increasingly difficult to be sure. Yet he realized that they were quite different. Tarkin was embarrassed by Aristina's voice, as his imagination was running wild because of the useless chatter of the maids. But he turned around and exhaled, for she was wearing a completely different nightgown, and he noticed that the girl had a pleasant scent, and probably her cheeks were flushed after the bath, and that white dress was even more dangerous. As they approached their bridal chamber, Aristina noted that his maids were extremely capable, but their diligence was a little strange. As they entered the room, the two of them stared in rapt attention at the room, which smelled like madness, and they even listened to the sounds of romance emanating from the room and the bed in general. The princess thought the bed was too small for the room, but she instantly rushed there and fell into the soft bed. She was happily thankful that it was possible to feel such a thing in the world, and promised never to forget the efforts of her maids, and to be sure to thank them when she opened her business. She realized, however, that the bed was a little too small, and she and Tarkin would be cramped, while the boy stood in shock at her sudden impulse. Aristina decided that the best defense was offense, saying that he would not take the bed away from her as it belonged to her, and offered the guy to sleep on the floor. After all, she made it clear, and even before the wedding said that she loved everything soft, it would be cruel of him to take it away from her and make her sleep on the floor, as he had no objections when she told him about it. After listening to her, the man realized that the girl did not have a single backward thought, and apparently he was just imagining a little too much, and he was the only one thinking about how their wedding night would go. Aristina lost her mind for a second on the soft bed, for she had just told the master of the palace to sleep on the floor and had confused which of them was in charge. The girl realized that she had once decided that when she got out of prison, she would do it, because she wanted to wash herself clean, cover herself with a dry blanket in a soft bed, and fall asleep. When Tarkin sat down on the bed, he said in a confused manner that usually the husband did not sleep on the floor and on the first wedding night. The girl herself did not realize what she was saying and could not do anything about it, so she said that they could sleep holding hands only, as other actions were forbidden. The man understood that she had drawn a clear line, though the most important thing in the contract marriage was the birth of a child in which the blood of two peoples would be mixed, but it was better to think about children later. The girl realized that as his business partner, she was sure that she could make him king even without a child, because she had the eye of the emperor, so he had to keep his innocence only to her. The girl said that she knew that he had a lover, because one look was enough to realize it, and how could one not know when they bragged about it in front of her? The man understood that from the wedding to the present moment, Princess Aristina behaved as if nothing had happened. He was annoyed to be dragged along at the same pace as she was, because he realized that this child was his lover. Aristina continued on, realizing that there was an additional point to their negotiations, and although Irugo practiced monogamy, it did not apply to the king. She was not greedy for the title of queen, so if he behaved well, she could give it to her, because he also wanted her not to be a concubine, but a queen. And since the offer was not limited, the most favorable conditions were presented. After Tarkin refused, the girl said that she had to make the others think that they had really spent their wedding night. However, as it turned out from Tarkin's words in Irugo, they did not emphasize the innocence of the bride. And Aristina immediately felt that in some points, the people of Irugo were more sensible than the Sylvanians. However, the better the relationship between the couple, the higher the social acceptance. And then she said that looking at his muscles and strength, one could well assume that he could have broken the bed during the wedding night. However, looking at his reaction, she realized that she was mistaken, because she thought that he could do such a thing. So she asked, because he stopped the rushing carriage with one hand, but apparently on the contrary, hurt his pride. After all, it was very easy to hurt the male ego in this matter, and did not know what to do and how to restore relations after the quarrel. Afterwards, she realized that he should have been praised by saying that Tarkin could easily break the bed, and it was just her ignorance. He could break it into 2 or 4 pieces, and each of them would break with a bang because he was a god in bed. Plus, he was still young and could improve his skills, and she would make a lot of money and give him a lot of energy. The man said that these conversations were enough, but he could break the bed even though he had never done it. Suddenly, however, he turned over and hovered over the girl, and then he struck a very hard blow. The bed broke in half with a crack and noise, and Aristina wondered if the bed was broken, where they would sleep now. The girl was upset because she wanted to sleep in a comfortable bed, after which Tarkin lifted the mattress and said that she could sleep there, because although the frame was broken, the mattress was not damaged. After Tarkin said that in that case he could sleep on the floor, Aristina asked him not to worry, because she had said earlier that they could sleep together with only their hands touching. After they lay down together, they both had different thoughts in their minds. Tarkin thought that Aristina was really an unusual girl. The princess realized that it was the first time she had slept with someone, and then she gradually fell into slumber. After the girl fell asleep, she had a wonderful feeling as if she was being caressed by the warm rays of the sun. Walking through the forest, she saw a tree with a huge amount of fresh buns. There were so many baked goods that she saw for the first time. But when she turned around, she saw a small white bread that looked like it came out of a children's fairy tale. Since she had only tasted black bread, she wondered what the white bread tasted like. So she decided to try it, and as soon as she caught it and grasped it with her teeth, she woke up sharply and fell from her bed. Of course she was sorry, because the dream was filled with joy, but the soft bed was still the best. She turned around and said good morning to Tarkin. However, she didn't understand why the guy jumped away from her so suddenly. On the girl's question, what happened and why he looked at her like that, He answered that she said that they would sleep, only holding hands. And did she pretend and really did not understand? The princess was confused and wondered if she had let go of his hand in her dream, and he was offended because of that, contrary to her expectations. The image of this man required a lot of effort. Tarkin couldn't stand it any longer and remembered that she had said that they would sleep holding hands. Had she forgotten how she had bitten his chest all night? Then Tarkin realized that it was not for nothing that they said that people who said they would only hold hands could not be trusted. Aristina tried to explain by saying that it was not that, she had just had a dream without any malicious intent. But after the incident, she apologized for a long time. After that, the maids discussed that Mr. Tarkin had missed the morning meeting because he had stayed asleep in the bedroom, and when they went to check what was going on there, the bed was broken. At breakfast, Aristina had a table full of different dishes because the maids thought that she had to eat more in order to keep up with Mr. Tarkin's physical power. They were outraged and did not understand how His Highness could do such a thing to the weak little princess, for he was so rude that he even broke the bed. Although both of them are on everyone's lips and the mutual relationship should look great, therefore she didn't think it was worth fixing this misunderstanding. However, she was a little worried about Diona. She had not intentionally taken his innocence, but she had decided that they would sort it out on their own, since as far as she knew there had been no interference in the lovers' relationship from the beginning. Suddenly, one of her maids burst into the dining room and started shouting that the princess had no idea what had happened because she had been idling until noon and had no time to stretch her meal. As soon as she tried to start telling something, she was stopped by Tarkin's maid, asking how the girl dared to come in without knocking and interrupt the princess's meal. After all, a court lady should think first of all about her mistress, and she didn't even think about her. Although the girl came with the princess from her home country, now she was not a guest from a distant country. She is the wife of the host and also the hostess, and they do not tolerate court ladies who do not know properly the rules of etiquette and do not understand the situation. So she had to properly memorize how to help the hostess. She was interrupted by the princess, who said that she had had enough. And although Brody did not show any concern for the princess, she showed sincerity in coming here to ask what had happened. From that moment, the courtier's behavior had changed. Brody didn't understand how they could humiliate her so much, and since when the princess had managed to lure the maids to her side. However, she said that the wild, cruel people of Arugo had made a scene, and their knights had been badly wounded. Listening to her story, Aristina realized that even though Brody was frightened, she had not lost her pride and wondered why she had to get involved. She was not their nanny. The maid was indignant because the princess was obliged to do the right thing. They were Sylvanian, and the problem should be solved regardless of who she was married to. If you cut Brody's story short, it would appear that on the first wedding night when she and Tarkin broke the bed, according to tradition, the knights and Sylvanians were supposed to defend the palace. But the knights of Irugo suddenly attacked the Sylvanus knights. Believing in the alliance, the careless knights of Sylvanus could not offer proper resistance, so they were unilaterally attacked. Because of the war, the knights of the two countries were deeply divided, and although the couple spread the news of their beautiful marital relationship whenever possible, it would not be good if the clash between the subordinates became known. Besides, according to the maid, it was a one-sided attack, and an international conflict could break out. At the same time, Tarkin learned of the attack. Of course he had foreseen that one day such an issue would arise, but he had not expected that Durant, who had always avoided conflict, would start it himself. Durant, the sword defender, is not interested in what's going on around him. He has a broad outlook and is quick to make decisions, but in general, he doesn't care about anything. The only one he cares about is his leader Tarkin. When he made his decision, he considered whether it would be beneficial to His Highness or not. So now he's in Tarkin's office apologizing for jeopardizing his political authority at such a difficult time. I know that Durant was not interested in the opinion of others. The prince said that it was known that he did not care about such things. He was more interested in what he did it for. The evening before the bridal night, there was no place for a grain to fall in the waiting room for the knights. One of the knights present there was the one who held a grudge against the princess. while the others discussed the fact that the princess was much more beautiful than they thought, and on the way it was necessary not to mock her, but to try to seduce her. Many were sorry that such beauty had fallen into Varvara's hands, for she had no pride at all, though she was part of the imperial family, and they discussed that Tarkin must be having fun now, and did not understand why they should keep their eyes open while they were having fun. But passing by was Durant, who heard all this talk, and realized that this knight was insane, and came to check what was going on, because there were no guards outside. However, insulting the imperial family was a criminal offense, and he wouldn't make excuses even if he was imprisoned. The knights, on the other hand, continued to discuss whether the heavy character and unenlightened processes would be a problem. One of them informed everyone that the girl would regret refusing the commander. But if you think about it, it was even better that she refused him, because no one could think how promiscuous their noble princess was. Mukali burst into the room, and first of all he struck the captain, and then he began to scatter all the knights in the corners. When one of the knights noticed Jacqueline's tactics, he said that they would formally protest the attack. And since Jacqueline knew how far things could go, he had to reinstate him immediately, or the knights would use force. In response, however, he only felt a blow. Mukali then said that the tactician was also causing trouble, but Jacqueline replied that the brainless knight had pulled his trigger with his ramblings. Since Jacqueline held Mukali instead of calming him down, Durant had to deal with all the consequences. Because of that, he asked Tarkin not to worry as he was his sword and dealt with all the consequences. At the same time, Brody was perplexed, since the knights had been hurt and the princess had indulged. She also did not understand why the princess had chosen to eat eggs for breakfast. The fact was that she was not aware of what part of him was hurt, but reported that the knights had made the commander a eunuch. The next morning, the captain woke up in the intensive care unit, not knowing how he got there and lacking any sensation in his lower body. The doctor standing next to him told him that he was bleeding in a bad place and would not be able to have any more children because he would not be able to have intercourse. Suddenly, the princess entered the room and came as soon as she learned that her dear knights were badly wounded. Aristina was surprised to see the knights rejoicing and asking for help. She didn't know they were in such good shape and thought that they should not greet her because they were extremely ill. Looking at their reactions, she didn't know if she was being honest and if they were really touched, but she couldn't help but come. After all, her loyal knights were injured. She realized that these people had treated her badly and thought she was coming to sincerely comfort them, but apparently their brains were really not good at drawing conclusions. The knights began to talk about how these barbarians, ill-mannered and uneducated warriors, had attacked them and then done all these terrible things. Aristina had heard that they had been attacked unilaterally, but it didn't seem to be true, because she was told every day that if the knights had gone to war, then Sylvanus would have won by wiping out Irago. But in real life, only they had been beaten. All these thoughts did not fit in her head, because how could this happen to her magnificent knights? And why did Irugo's warriors attack them? Because she thought that if the knights hadn't made dirty jokes about her Princess Sylvanus and Prince Irugo's wife, they would have remained unharmed. Insulting a member of the royal family is a criminal offense, even though they have the ruler of a larger country behind their backs who has given evidence of rebellion. They made fun of her because they were all complicit. However, the traitor had already been found. They must have subconsciously sensed that a crack in their collective was gradually breaking out. The knight began to justify himself by saying that the princess was right, because a knight who makes dirty jokes cannot be considered valiant, and wondered if there was someone among their men who saw everything with his own eyes and reported it. The knight part is everything to a warrior. If their crime is known to the public, even when they return to Sylvanus, they will be pointed at. It seems that Irugo's warriors had no reason to attack her knights. The knight explained that they had actually hurt themselves trying to catch a magical animal to celebrate her wedding when the animal hit them in a bad place. It seems that the Knight of Sylvanus wanted to tell the whole truth and made them deny the existence of the incident. After Her Highness's words, the maid didn't understand how such a thing was even possible. Aristina smiled, for just when she started to question them, they immediately bucked and realized how weak and worthless they really were. She thought that they would tell everything if she pretended to be innocent, because in fact, she saw absolutely every phrase and word through the Emperor's eye, but she was bored that they were so quick to confess. So she said that she had talked to the doctor, and he said that the knights would have to stay in the hospital for 2 months, but would get leave of absence because they had been injured fighting the monster valiantly, so she planned to destroy the Emperor's puppets. After all, they really wanted to accompany the lady, but the circumstances were such that they could not do so now. So Aristina got all their signatures for the dismissal. She avoided the displeasure of Irugo's warriors and simultaneously exhausted the Sylvanian cause for protest. The politically dangerous factor for Tarkin was eliminated, so she wished them a good rest and asked Brody to bring gifts for the sick. The maid brought them hard-boiled eggs, and the princess added that the eggs were very nutritious and good for the body, and that they were also good for the recovery, so she wished them a pleasant appetite. And after the girl broke the egg on the whole hospital exclaimed, the knight understood that in this way she tried to humiliate them. She herself became the cause of his shame, and did not understand how it is possible to be so calm. After that, the knight very sharply unexpectedly attacked the princess, but only seeing Tarkin in the doorway, he fell on the floor starting to eat the egg lying there. Aristina didn't understand what happened because the guy obviously wanted to attack her, but he changed direction very abruptly. If you don't know the truth, you could think that the knight was touched by the princess's gift, so he ate the egg. Turning sharply towards the door, she opened it and stepped outside, but was surprised as she didn't see anyone there. All 3 of the boys had scattered around like cockroaches as soon as Her Majesty suddenly came out so that she wouldn't notice them. But she noticed Tarkin standing in the street, and holding hands, they decided to walk over so that she could tell him what had happened. The guys were watching how harmonious the couple looked. Some of them were worried that it would be hard for the princess because their methods were quite radical. However, now they saw that they were worrying for nothing. Mukali was angry because he realized that if Tarkin had not come, the knight could have done something to the princess, but he had to be pressed. He had no right to behave like that to his mistress. Jacqueline was surprised, for he had not expected Mukali to be the first to go into battle, for he seemed to dislike the princess. Durant took the floor and said that they had to take into account the fact that the princess had been treated like a puppet, and that the emperor had treated his daughter as if she were invisible. Abroad, it was said that the girl was sick, but in the country, the prevailing opinion is that the princess has some other problems, because it is said that she is feeble-minded, that she has psychological problems from the fact that she could not leave the castle. However, when they met her, they realized that it was just a rumor, and although it was just a guess from Jacqueline, he believed that it was due to the power of the direct line of inheritance of Sylvanus. Children in the direct line of inheritance are born with special abilities. The power is awakened at 5 years of age, after which time it will no longer develop, as will the epiphyseal plate. A lesson that requires training and mana that requires mathematical formulas have different sources of power. Her Highness's older brother, Prince Rondelin, is known as a master of his craft. There is also an ability that is unique to emperors that is the pinnacle of skill. The hallmark of this ability is silver hair, and this skill was possessed by the first emperor of Sylvanus. That's why Jacqueline understood that the princess was isolated after 5 years when her ability didn't manifest. And the girl was considered useless because there are many parents who try to fill their sense of inferiority through their children. Usually people who have overcome difficulties, even if the situation improves, cannot adapt and live out of self-pity. But the princess is different. She seemed to be waiting for the moment to blossom like a flower. The girl was telling Tarkin happily about how the knights had spasmed and said that they had been hurt by monsters during the battle. She had been waiting for that. That's why she had quickly slipped them the documents, and now this conflict would not go international. The man was not a bit surprised, because he did not doubt her for a second. However, in the compartment of papers, he noticed another one that was different from the others. It was a receipt in which it was said that the man was obliged to pay Princess Aristina a certain amount of money for the registration of dismissal and sending to the homeland of the knights. Realizing that this was a blatant extortion, the princess asked not to be misunderstood, because it was just money for her personal business. The man did not understand why she needed it, because he had a lot of money, and she was his wife. Did she have other political reasons for necessarily open a business? But the girl didn't understand if she needed any other reasons than money to start a business. Besides, the estimate she had been given showed that she should spend the prince's money, not her own. After they had eaten, they were on their way to the palace, and Diona came to greet His Highness the Prince and the Princess. Just seeing her, Aristina seemed to understand what she had come there for at the moment, her wedding with Tarkin was the most discussed topic. Although the subject of the wire carriage was also topical. The next day, the incident with the bed filled the first lines of the newspapers, as Diona did not know that it was she who had originally encouraged Tarkin to break the bed and could not hear the preliminary discussion. Diona was probably in shock. So Aristina decided to leave the two of them alone, because they had already discussed the main issues and could talk about business when they were alone. She was just about to say goodbye when Diona asked to borrow His Highness Tarkin for a while, because she had something to tell her and interrupted her on purpose. The princess realized that even though she had the same idea, she was a little hurt by it, but she saw nothing wrong with it and was about to leave them. But Tarkin took her hand and told Diona that he was busy talking to his wife. Aristina understood that the situation was rather heated, as Diona had been rejected by her husband, but she apologized to the princess. Tarkin also added that since the princess was now his wife, Diona should address her as Her Highness and call her by that name from now on. Aristina realized that this was probably a confrontation, and she didn't like to be the third extra in the relationship between the two lovers, so she wanted to leave them alone. Well, when she tried to leave them, Tarkin wouldn't let her go. So she decided to talk right there and offered Diona to stay with them for a meal. She didn't know what had happened between them, but she needed to quench her personal interest and said that they had excellent pastry chefs. So the food was delicious and Diona could help herself. The girl gloatingly grinned, because she thought that the princess did not know what a high class was, as she had lived in confinement, and Tarkin was not a fan of such desserts, and of course he was a professional pastry chef. But if you compare the desserts with other parlors, they were superior. However, when she tasted one of the desserts, she was delighted. After all, Tarkin's pastry chefs were not known for their skill before, but now it was a whole different level and clearly new. She knew that Tarkin didn't like sweets, but he had hired a new pastry chef, so he had done it intentionally, even though it wasn't his style, and Diona's face didn't radiate happiness at all. But looking at her face, Aristina felt déjà vu and couldn't remember what it reminded her of. However, she said that she had acted inattentively and apologized to the girl because she didn't need to eat through force. Diona was surprised that the princess apologized to her even though there was no reason to do so, and realized that she was clever, as she gave the impression that she had kindly invited her to the table. But it was only a trap to make her an ill-mannered lady for refusing. She was trying to prove that she was above Diona. So she asked her empathetically if she had ruined the princess's spirits, knowing that Aristina wouldn't be able to make her look bad in Tarkin's eyes. But Aristina only remembered that this food was not suitable for Diona's symptoms, because flour was contraindicated, persimmons were the worst enemy, and all these desserts contained caffeine. The princess realized that Diona had probably eliminated all these foods from her diet because they were related to her problem, and she was ashamed that she had fed her and then taken it all away. So she asked if Diona was okay. Last time they met in the bride's room, the girl ran off to the ladies' room very quickly and was worried. Diona was furious that Aristina was making her look bad in front of Tarkin. She is Diona Palaman idol for the ladies of Irugo Kingdom. She always guarded her image of a perfect woman, so she reached for the food saying she could eat all the desserts. But Aristina reached for them first, saying she shouldn't have, and apologized for spoiling her mood by taking away the food. But she thought it was for her own good, because if she wanted to beat the disease, she should have refrained from the desired food. Diona had already lost her temper and asked how the girl could be the prince's wife if she had no brains at all. She should not have made such a categorical decision, having initially misunderstood the situation. The girl realized that Tarkin had heard the whole conversation, and she had never raised her voice or got mad in front of him. But it was not enough, because now her image was ruined. Then she ran away again, and Aristina said that she could understand, and she shouldn't have worried about her illness. But since it could hurt her, She asked Tarkin to pretend as if he didn't know anything, and she was surprised that Tarkin didn't follow Diona because she wanted to tell him something, and she was his girlfriend. Shouldn't a guy in such a situation run after his beloved to comfort her? But looking at Tarkin, she assumed he was in a bad mood or they were in a fight. But even so, she was still his girlfriend. He should be worried. Tarkin realized that his wife was extremely worried and offered to send Diona something for irritable bowel syndrome, after which Aristina felt ashamed that Tarkin had heard their conversation. Mukali did not know about the past life of the little girl and realized that those knights were really devoid of any common sense because they treated their mistress in such a way. His thoughts were interrupted by Diona, who came running in tears and began to tell him that the princess had humiliated and insulted her too cruelly in front of the prince. Mukali hoped that Diona would understand him correctly, but perhaps Her Highness the Princess did not get her point across correctly due to the difference in their cultures, and most likely she had no malicious intent since Tarkin did not say anything. Diona was surprised and didn't understand what was going on, because among the three friends Mukali was the most hostile to the Sylvanian, and why his reaction had changed completely. The man answered that he didn't like the princess. He was loyal only to their prince. His Highness took good care of his people, so if something bad happened to Diona, he would protect her. But if he didn't make any remarks to Her Highness, it meant that she had no malicious intent, and he hoped that Diona's broad soul would understand her, for she was Chandra's own sister, and His Highness thought very highly of her. Diona inwardly was burning with anger because she realized that now Mukali was useless, and she was not just Chandra's sister, but a special woman for the prince. But all she said in reply was that Mukali was His Highness's most loyal warrior, and on reflection she realized that she had been too hot-headed and hoped that he would continue to listen to her, and she would go to the princess and stab her with a knife and cause a riot. She said she only wished Her Highness well, so she said she should have stopped investigating the princess because she thought the princess was having an affair with another man, and though she was a good person, she didn't want there to be any misunderstandings. She planned to spread rumors about the immorality of the princess and also to unravel her whole life and prove her immorality. Mukali noticed that Diona did not understand him. His Highness did not interfere in this conversation, so it was just a misunderstanding between them, and Her Highness is a good person. She certainly could not do that, but asked Diona not to hesitate because he will find out everything in detail. If the princess had betrayed His Majesty, she could not escape Mukali's sword, and Diona, who wished His Highness Tarkin well, would trust only him. The maids discussed that the first wedding night was important, but the second night should not be forgotten. Through secret sources, they learned that His Highness Tarkin was now taking aroma baths, and all were waiting for this night and were excited. So for the princess, they prepared a full care which included bathing, aroma baths, manicure, and also different masks. They hoped she would enjoy it. But the girl said that she would refuse because in the first half of the day, she had taken an ordinary bath and did not want to take aromatic bath. And when they would dry her hair, she would lie on the crib. They were surprised because they expected a lot since H.H. Tarkin had taken a bath, and they thought she should be prepared. But their relationship was ostentatious, and this procedure had nothing to do with her. So she said that she was fine. She wouldn't need the aroma oils. She also wanted to meditate while washing, so she asked not to be disturbed. The maids realized that they still had a lot to learn. They thought that they served her with all their heart. But it is not enough, because at the beginning of the relationship, the main stimulants are pheromones emitted by the beloved, and true love does not need jewelry. Her Majesty's natural scent worked better than any fragrant oils, and they still had to prepare for the massage for the princess after her washing. Hearing their conversation outside the door, Aristina realized that they didn't quite hear her words correctly, and interpreting words in such a way was a kind of talent, so she realized that they needed to keep an eye on them from time to time. In case they were as useful as the knights in the fight, she looked into the water, hoping to see something in the water surface, because the Emperor's eye had only given her useful information. She found the idea of a scented bath surprisingly amusing. The image of a clean-shaven Tarkin leaving the tub lingered in her mind. and she wondered if perhaps he was so relaxed because of his experience with Diona, and if that meant he was a womanizer. Every time they met, he showed himself to be an amazing partner, with a touch of the perverted, but at the same time a royal grandeur emanating from him. It was as if he had power with her when he grabbed her hand and asked her not to leave. And suddenly, looking into the water, she noticed that the Emperor's eye had begun to work. In the water, she recognized the same blacksmith she had seen at the banquet. The guys around him called him Retran. A few moments later, she saw a few of the guys insulting him, saying that this scum was only threatening in appearance, but although he was of broad build in life, his character didn't match his appearance. And since they knew he couldn't hit back, they all rushed at him, because no matter how strong he was, he couldn't handle their numerical superiority because they were going to teach him a lesson today. They kept talking about how Retran had betrayed them. He should have been quiet, but without hesitation he followed the master into the banquet hall. Did he really want the position of Catalaman's apprentice? Her vision ended with one of the guys grabbing a knife in his hand and stabbing him very hard, leaving him with an injured arm. Aristina thought that he had lost his thumb because of an accident while working dangerously at the forge, but as it turned out, that was not the case. When the maids came out of the bathroom, they began to massage her, telling her that spring had sprung and that the days were warm and the magnolia blossoms could bloom until the middle of the month. Aristina realized that there was not much time left. She could not postpone the hiring of workers until next year. That meant that the event would take place this year, and the tree behind the man was clearly a magnolia tree, so she hoped that the guy would be all right, as he would be her #1 employee in the future. At the same time, the knights informed the maids that they were leaving, and the girls were angry because they had to do the emperor's bidding, and they didn't think they could live happily ever after back home. Rosalind went to the princess when she heard the news of the knight's return, and told her how Brody's face was when she heard the news. She turned pale and began to shake. The knights cried and said that when they returned, they would fall into their mother's arms because they were cowards. Rosalind also said that Brody had been expelled from the social circle once before, and that she would not be welcomed home. So it was foolish of her to think that she would not be bullied. Aristina was puzzled, for it was the first time in a long time that Rosalind had a day off, and she did not understand why the girl was there and spending her time with her. Rosalind did not understand why the princess was angry, and explained that she had nothing to do and just wanted to chat with the princess about the current situation, as they could become friends by gossiping about others. The princess turned out that she had explained it all to her in the first place. She needed a hound. After all, even an old toothless dog could howl from afar. What's the point of having a hound if she can't hunt anymore? But she loved the puppies too. Rosalind was upset because she only wanted to open up to the princess and make friends, but she was only a maid of honor and did not understand why Aristina had become so similar to the people of Arugo. After this conversation, Aristina was riding in a carriage with another maid, the window overlooking Mr. Mukali's mansion. The girl told her that he was a descendant of an ancient military family, and as it turned out, a prominent aristocrat. Mukali was surrounded by maids who understood that he was not going to listen to them. The women could not believe that he was going to meet the princess in such a form, because he looked like a dirty thief. The guy realized that the maids did not understand his worries, and only did what they did to have fun. He had to find out about the identity of the man who has made the princess and digs under her. But he turned around and said that he was a cold-blooded and ruthless warrior of the plains, and could not easily get in touch with the soul of pathetic special creatures as women did. He turned around to reassure himself and decided that he would slowly continue his investigation, as it was of the utmost importance to him to get rid of the injustice, for the girl was small and defenseless like a child. As soon as Aristina saw the joyful Mukali rushing towards her, she said that by protecting her, he had broken the heart of the Sylvanian knights. The embarrassed man replied that perhaps she had misunderstood everything, as it was not he who had broken them. The princess was surprised that he had spoken so formally, and thought that only Mukali was capable of such actions. However, the man said that he had originally addressed her the same way, and that she was now His Highness's wife, and said that there was tea brewing for her in the tea room, and they should have gone there. When they went away, Mukali said that it was his decision, but it was not he who had inflicted such injuries on them. But he had first decided to knock out their teeth because he was not cruel and ruthless, but knew about humanity. In the tea room, they were served strawberry tea, which was sweet and delicious, and Aristina offered to drink it with the Scones she had brought, because their pastry chef was excellent, and she was obliged to show it off. The man remembered that during the banquet, he was only on his way to the capital, so he did not participate, and later learned that His Majesty had decided to form a ration of Scones. Jacqueline explained that in the middle of the meeting, Tarkin told him to hire a pastry chef who was good at baking slopes, and a guy came running to him who, upon investigation, found out that the best pastry chef at the moment was the chief from the palace of Enika, and he had to get him. His Highness Tarkin considered efficiency an extremely important criterion, but Mukali didn't understand if they had cookies in their dry rations, why swap them for Scones? He wanted to ask what the point was, but assumed His Majesty knew better. But now, as it turned out, the reason was not the rations, but sitting right across from him. Aristina turned to him, remembering that last time he had said he would help her. Since she had left the palace today, she was eager to meet the guy. But she couldn't hide her purpose from the general, so she asked him to go with her and keep their trek today a secret from Tarkin. Irugo is a land of fire and steel. One can guess that the blacksmiths dealing with fire and steel have high status, and sometimes their influence is comparable to aristocratic families. But unlike aristocrats, they pass their skills to apprentices, and the strongest ones become Tarkin's knights. Thus, for Tarkin, who has no maternal relatives, they became a pillar in maintaining the balance in the struggle for the throne. For 100 years, a forge called Catalaman protects the first person of Irugo. When one of the blacksmiths ran out to meet them, Aristina apologized for coming only out of the blue, as she had heard that this forge was open at any moment and wanted to see the best forge in the land of fire and steel. The man smiled and said that he was honored and that the Catalaman forge was indeed the best in Irugo, and led them inside where everyone looked at the princess with rapt attention. As Aristina looked around, she noticed that the quality of the weapons matched the reputation of the forge, and the name was used along with the year of manufacture. For her business, to cut down a monster, the sword must be sharp, but the ability to resist aura is equally important. The man who approached her explained that especially if a weapon was to be made that could withstand the aura of a strong warrior like Mr. Tarkin, only such items hung on the walls of Catalaman. The swords of virtuosos of their craft, a kind of weapon that had been successfully trained, so the dates were left there as a memento. The man who approached them was called Philip. He also offered to drink tea. She asked if there were any items forged by Retran. Philip was surprised that the girl knew about him, but explained that the boy had always been close to him, but only stood out in childhood. Aristina was surprised, because through the Emperor's eye, she could see that he was the best blacksmith in the future. But now the other workers did not think so, but she could not say how far into the future she saw Retran. So she assumed that the boy's talent would manifest itself when he lost his thumb. But suddenly, Mukali pointed to the wall, where there was a plaque with Retran's name on it, but no sword. Philip was surprised to see it hanging there. There used to be a dagger that Retran had forged when he first arrived. It was very beautiful. It was hard to believe that it was actually made by an apprentice, but to his great regret, he could not forge anything after that. But Philip did not realize who had taken it, because yesterday, the dagger had been there, and only the workers could open the lock. Remembering her vision, the girl assumed it was the silver dagger, and immediately realized what had happened. In a few moments, she and Mukali were already entering the room where the boys were surrounding Retran. They were extremely surprised to see the princess on the doorstep. She then asked and gave her the dagger as soon as possible, after which she handed it over to Guy, praising him for his fine work. After this incident, Mukali shouted at her because it was a rather rash act. She could not imagine how frightened he was when she ran away. In spite of the princess's objection, he continued to rage, because there was a possibility that someone would attack her, as people could not see anything in front of them when they went crazy, and she could be seriously hurt. The girl explained that this did not happen, because everyone at first sight understood who she was, especially with Mr. Mukali next to her, so she was not threatened. They were joined by the head of the forge of Catalaman named Bolton. He was unhappy that the guys had behaved shamefully on the day they were visited by the dignitary, and promised to talk to them later. But in the meantime, he sent them all under lock and key. He apologized to Aristina for showing their forge in such a shameful light, and thanked them for preventing such a disaster. Since Aristina was their benefactress, she had the right to know the reason for the accident. The essentials for working in the forge are physical strength and patience. All cattleman workers have these qualities, but a keen sense of instinct, clear eyes, and a clear head are traits that can only come from nature. When Retran showed him a finely crafted sword as a child, he thought he had found a treasure. When he learned of his abilities, he treated him like a son so that he would not develop bad habits. He took it upon himself to raise him. And also, Bolton himself passed on to him all the secrets of craftsmanship. Of course, Retran had envious people, and his own children were no exception. But even they had to recognize the talent of the guy. Under absolutely any circumstances, blacksmiths have to keep the fire going by stepping on furs and forging metal. But the guy said that he would prefer to spend his days at a desk because he liked it better. Gradually, he began to move away from blacksmithing, instead spending his time on odd and untidy objects. Last month, Bolton even took him to the palace with him, in hopes that this trip would educate him. But now he even spent more time in his room. Only the best masters can be brought to the palace, so the other boys feel betrayed. But Bolton didn't expect it could lead to such a result. Hoping he was thinking fast, but now he was confused. The man told the story for quite a while, but the general meaning was pretty clear. So the girl asked what would happen to Retran now, since he had the basic knowledge the guy would have no trouble taking care of himself. Aristina realized that the incident happened in front of a high-ranking person, so she hoped that the boy would not be bullied for a while. However, if Bolton continued to take care of him, then there would be a dissatisfaction building up in Rethrina that would one day erupt into anger at Bolton. Better to let go of the internal strife than to continue to nurture it. She shook her head a little and said that her heart ached at the memory. In the court of Emperor Sylvanus, only those in authority with permission could carry copper, and today was the first time she had ever seen a man with an edged weapon pointed at him. So she said she didn't think she could forget such a shocking scene, and since she was so frightened, she couldn't imagine the fear Retran felt, and wanted to go to him personally and comfort him. Retran sat in his room and remembered the princess who covered him with her small body and didn't understand how she wasn't scared. He was so scared that he could only run away forever. But suddenly his thoughts were interrupted by a knock on another door where the princess entered. The man fell on his knees thanking her, as he had no chance to tell her at once. He couldn't believe that the princess was really standing in front of him, and why she would visit someone like him. So holding out her hand, she asked him to drop the formalities, and just as she thought he had strong hands that keep on doing things, and with the loss of his thumb, he would have become limited in action, and luckily, she was not too late and was able to prevent it. Aristina noticed some small thing in the guy's hands. He explained that it didn't really deserve his attention, just one sloppy thing that he clutched, and it improved his mood. Admiring his work, the girl asked if he had any others. They were in his room and there was a kitten and a puppy and a tit and a hamster, also a rabbit, and there were lots of them. The girl noticed that they were the perfect size and shape and wondered if he molded them, because they were all small but weighed differently. The guy explained that they were made of rickled steel in different combinations, which is a steel that contains other special elements besides iron carbon. It was quite amazing because if you alloy metals with different properties, you get different shapes. They were as strong as steel but much lighter. She remembered Bolton's words that a blacksmith was traditionally obliged to be near the fire, and if he sat quietly, the blacksmith's spirit would be extinguished. But Retran only made strange figurines and didn't spend any time on blades. She didn't understand how a man could ruin such a bright talent when she saw these pieces. And there was a lot of handwork and engraving. It was his experimental work in which he tried and compared new alloy steels. She worried that her interference changed Retran's fate and prevented the development of his talent. But in vain she worried, because the guy is the gold she discovered. Contrary to her expectations, Retran and Mukali got along well. The boy explained that at first, the man seemed intimidating, and he didn't expect to be able to communicate with him so well. The girl thanked him for showing all his works. They were really beautiful, but Retran thought that they were not worth a drop of attention from a princess. When she asked him why he thought that, he answered simply, "After all, it was Katamalan, the most important forge of Arugo. If it doesn't pass in Katamalan when looked at objectively, then it wasn't worth anything." He was quite stubborn. That was how he repaid the master for sheltering him. He was told to stop, but he couldn't do it. However, Aristina interrupted him by asking if he ever thought that such a genius of wagons was not enough in this forge. Or was he developing his talent in his own way? For the princess, he was a genius for trying to keep up with the flow of people and inspiration, and it was by no means vanity or pride. The girl really thought so, for she was sure of it when she saw his product. Only Retran could make what she wanted. As she lay in bed in the evening, Aristina realized that her first trip out of the palace had been a success. And though she had mostly chatted and drank tea, she was still tired from the journey. However, because of this, she was completely satisfied with the trip, and was surprised that Tarkin was informed that she had gone with Mukali to the forge, but explained that she was there to find goods. Tarkin believed that the royal palace blacksmiths specialized in repairs, and did not know if there was a craftsman that would leave the illustrious Catalaman. But when the girl reported that she had succeeded and he was now hers, Tarkin wondered if it would be strange if he questioned her, and if perhaps he was taking too much interest in Aristina. Even though they were married, they are business partners most of the time, so he didn't know what her words meant and how the situation worked out, but he convinced himself that it was none of his business. Aristina was surprised that her husband was not disturbed by the fact that she, who did not understand the general state of affairs in the world, had started a business. The man did not understand why, if the guy was an employee. She called him hers, and when he heard his name, he realized that it was the guy who was hanging around her at the dinner party. The girl replied that Retran was really a good person, and in any case, she was doing the right thing, so Tarkin shouldn't speak badly of him, and he was her first employee. Then she pushed Tarkin away and told him to let her sleep, because if they went on like that, all her sleep would be gone. But the boy immediately pulled the blanket off her. The girl called him to her and explained that when you sleep sweetly, you have good dreams. And though he was surprised, this time they would really hold hands, though it was hard for him to forget what had already been done. The guy lay down beside her and took her hand, saying that if he was her first business partner, she should take care of him too. The girl was confused because she thought she was doing her role well, and noticed that his hand was very warm and cozy, and she was getting more and more drowsy. From the very morning, everyone noticed that today, His Majesty Tarkin was working as if he were punishing himself, and they assumed that there was a reasonable reason for it. Next to him stood Mukali, who was explaining to another warrior that he lacked strength in the lower part of his body, for he was misdistributing his balance, and also explaining how to hold the copper properly. Tarkin then called Mukali aside and asked if anything strange had happened during yesterday's ride with the princess to Catalaman. The man replied emphatically that there had been nothing strange, but after a few seconds' silence, he said that there was in fact something the prince should know about. He enthusiastically began to talk about the thing that would be hard to call a sword, for it was so huge, heavy, thick and axe-shaped, and could rather be called a block of iron. He told of a new blacksmith going above and beyond the ordinary. He asked him to make a ceremonial sword and to make an incredible blade that could slit a dragon's throat, and though he had heard it was bulky and clumsy, it was still beautiful. After listening to his story, Tarkin realized that it was not what he wanted to hear, and Aristina must have been interested in the forge, but it was impossible that it was to her taste. Mukali also told him that Bolton had made a mask for him and had worked on it for a long time when he heard the story of his exploits, so he decided to make it, and it was an incredible mask with a slit for the eyes. This mask was made of malachite with flecks of gold matching the color of Mukali's eyes. He felt no malice in the gesture, for Bolton had always done things for him and tried to take care of him. But as he looked at the mask, he realized that even a man who was friendly to him was paying attention to his scar. After listening to the story, Tarkin realized that it was a useless act, and he didn't make the mask. After hearing about Mukali's actions, he listened to the words of his enemies who mocked the guy because of his scar. He thought that if he hid the scar, then Mukali would not be humiliated. The guy comes from a family of famous commanders during the victorious war. After a night offensive, he was seriously wounded, the traces of which are still on his face. Initially, he was not shy about his scar and was determined, but as time went on, he shut down due to the changed reaction of those around him. He avoided stares even when he was told that everything was fine, desperately pretended not to know, and at the crucial moment he was told that the mask suited him. This attitude only hurt the Mukali, but the lad replied that he did not accept the mask because it would narrow the view and it was quite uncomfortable. Sir Mukali is a warrior who fights between life and death, but if he speeds up the pace of battle even a little, he will fail. So the princess questioned the effectiveness of the mask. She did not assume that the mask was needed to hide the scar, and was tolerant as before, as she had never seen him without the scar and could not think of hiding it. Though it was an amazing experience for Mukali, when he saw the mask he wanted to get angry and tell him to take it away. But for some reason, there was a calmness in his soul. His face became even more radiant, so he decided not to accept the mask, but instead to take a batch of iron. When the new blacksmith comes to the workshop, he will need it. After that, Tarkin realized that retreat was in the new blacksmith's shop. But when he asked him what he was doing, Mukali immediately ran away from him and said that he had to go to the toilet. He realized that he had almost got into trouble, but he had promised the princess to keep it a secret because she wanted to surprise him. Tarkin thought that the girl had the disease of an entrepreneur who knows nothing about the state of money in the world. That's how she was going to prove it to him and gave her plan to the Mukala. First of all, she should produce a product, and when the first sample was finished, the first thing he would give it to Mukala for testing, and they would surprise Tarkin together. After their trip to Cataloman together, Mukali realized that he had no other goals but to produce goods. Looking into her sparkling eyes full of passion, his doubts dissipated like clouds in the sky. He was happy that the princess was not another man. He couldn't help but recognize that she was suitable for their prince. Also, she was a good person, deserving his trust. He was in a great mood and had great news, and since the misunderstanding had been dispelled, he was going to tell Diona this great news as soon as possible. However, noted to himself, what's strange when he said that they went to Cataloman, the two maid of honor quietly turned away. Would they have reacted? So if the princess had interest in another man, and even more important, was why Diona had such concerns in the first place. He realized he needed to pay more attention to the matter. In front of a large audience, witnessed by the Holy Pope, the two countries made a peace treaty. In the meantime, there were so many newspapers that published pictures of the bed that Tarkin's palace was overrun with journalists. But thanks to Sir Durant's activism, the number was minimized, and at the same time, Aristina hired Retran. And as soon as the magnolia leaves fell and the portal was properly opened, the Sylvanus delegation, having completed their mission, went home. Then came the time when petty frictions turned into problems of state, and as soon as that time faded into summer, visitors arrived. Sophia, a maid from the queen's palace, came to the palace to tell the queen that since they were now a family, they should have a friendly tea party. Aristina noticed that the weather was nice outside today, and since it was a regular meeting, she could feel relaxed, and the queen was able to catch her. So she agreed to the meeting. This time, a chair was prepared for her in the queen's palace. The woman did not want to attract attention in the same way, and she was invited to a friendly tea party. However, she felt like a black sheep among the princesses who were discussing the photographers. And the truth was that at every photo shoot, Yenneca gave the photographer gifts in full parade in order to look good in the photo. In addition, because of the pictures from the wedding of Tarkin and the princess, there was not a person who did not know that the newspapers that published pictures of Yenneca were the bearer of evil in public life was not easy. After finishing their conversation, the queen noticed that the princess had arrived, and upon greeting them, Aristina realized that it was obvious that they didn't want to see her as a member of the royal family. They had a formal conversation where the queen asked if she could address Aristina on a first-name basis. It was common for mothers-in-law to speak to their daughters-in-law on a first-name basis, but this was the Princess of Sylvanus, and the others felt that they should address each other respectfully. But despite that, Aristina agreed, saying that she could address her any way she wanted, and also said that her son Hamir was coming back because he wanted to see his mother. Aristina realized that Hamir was the first prince who never showed up at her wedding. The newspapers called it politics. There was no sense in saying that the prince, who was first in line to the throne, didn't show up at the historic celebration where the armistice treaty was signed. And some claimed that he did not come because he was on a secret trip abroad, and intriguers whispered that he moderately did not come because Tarkin's political position was getting stronger. If Hamir had been urgently summoned from abroad where portals are not used yet, the queen also sensed the fuss about his and Tarkan's wedding. In that case, she saw no point in worrying about the future that had not yet taken place, and decided to enjoy life eating all the desserts under the surprised looks of the women. The queen was surprised that such people still existed, because even when the princess was treated with disrespect, she did not feel contempt and could not outplay her. Aristina realized that the queen was a woman unlucky in life and wounded inside. Yet it was because of her that the status of the illegitimate Tarkin who caught demons on the border had risen. It was not for nothing they said that in politics, yesterday's enemy is your friend today, and tomorrow's friend will be your enemy tomorrow. She had not yet realized the power of the pair. The girl was approached by the queen, who noticed that she had never met her son before. She was not interested in getting to know the future king of Aruga. The woman also told about an important enterprise assigned to Hamir, a mine with magical stones that were purest and of A-class size. Aristina was surprised, because as it turned out, she didn't know something about his foreign mission, and the reason why he didn't come to their wedding ceremony. Magical stones are necessary for this world in neighboring countries, such as wood. They are constantly used for photos and communication. If there are large magical stones in the mine, then the situation of the empire will change, and the mine can change the status of Irugo. Hamir was responsible for this enterprise, and Aristina was very jealous of him, despite the fact that it was a state enterprise in his hands was literally a victorious sword. And if you imagine the astronomical profits from the development of the mine, it would be a huge amount. The queen noticed how the princess's gaze changed. Now she realized the full extent of their influence. Hamir had been the emperor's favorite since childhood. He had received fair support from the royal family members, because such an important state enterprise was entrusted to him. Men who tear magic stones from the bodies of monsters to take the place of the king were bad from the bloodline to the character, to the abilities. Smiling, continued the queen. Aristina realized that she was comparing him to Tarkan in a terribly vulgar way, and even though she was in a bad mood, they say that even hedgehogs are gentle with their cubs. Then what was the point of changing her mind? The queen explained that she said it was because he was her son. And what could she do if he was so handsome? He was always in turmoil because of the lady's relentless advances, and he was different from someone who grew up bullying and rude. In addition, her Hamir combines the masculine features characteristic of Irug and the grace of a foreign grandmother, and the queen thought it was a perfect combination. But one day, a newspaper noted that his white hair looked like silk threads, and his turquoise eyes sparkled like gems. Hearing about it, the princess realized that the vulgarity of the queen crosses all limits, and did not understand why she so praised the appearance of her son. First, unexpectedly, called me to tell her about her son's case, which she did not ask about, and then I wrote the appearance. The queen thought that Aristina was interested and offered to introduce them. And since it would be a difficult decision for her, she suggested that they meet once and see each other in person to see what it is like to be Hamir's woman. Aristina realized that it couldn't be worse because her mother-in-law suggested a blind date. The queen is a conservative and open-minded person, but she replied that she was married, and no matter how greedy she was, it was too much. Looking at the princess, Aristina was surprised because it seemed to her that she did not like her, and she should have been pleased with her refusal to look for a spouse. But it was unclear why Yenica was angry. So she asked her to calm down and said that being married, she would always be her daughter-in-law, and even if she did not marry Hamir, their relationship would not change. And the other princess realized that there was no need to make a fight there. It is necessary to quickly dot all the dots over and not to cause negative consequences. The queen intervened in the conversation and said that the princess had misunderstood her because she was just talking about her son and nothing more. The princess replied that if she had a son like Her Majesty's brother Hamir, she would brag about him every day because he is responsible for the mine of magic stones, and it is not possible for anyone else. If he had not been prepared to be a king since childhood, he would not have been entrusted with such an important mission. The queen agreed with all these words and said that she was sorry that Aristina was already married. She had a grown-up son, but judging by her words, she would not be her daughter-in-law. Although she could have been the first, and asked her not to blame others when she regretted her choice. For if she wanted to retain minimal rights after Hamir became king, she should not have refused the queen's outstretched hand, and still offered to be with her as daughter-in-law and mother-in-law, between whom the relationship of daughter and mother. At the same time, Tarkin was visited by Jacqueline, whom he asked to report even the smallest things connected with the princess. So he reported that the queen had called the princess to her palace. He also added that both princesses, Yenikarina and Princess Palaman, were present. Tarkin assumed that this would happen because the role of the princess is also to endure political conflicts. Besides, she said so herself when she discussed the treaty with him before the wedding. Her main job is to be his partner, and he shouldn't care if the girl is uncomfortable with the annoyances of the queen and princesses. So he replied to Jacqueline that right now they needed to focus on planning the monster campaign, and it was crazy to focus on such a small problem, and immediately rushed towards the queen's palace. Jacqueline didn't understand why he was going so fast, and asked him to take care of him, a civil servant, because the meeting room was in a completely different direction. Then Tarkin suddenly suggested that Jacqueline walk, saying that his body was too weak, and in a few moments they were already outside the Empress's palace. At the same time, he heard Aristina's reply that a mother-in-law could not replace a mother, and although the queen regretted the fact of her marriage, she was not at all saddened by it because she liked her husband. The queen didn't think that her assessment of a person could change so many times, and replied that it hurt her because she didn't expect her to say no, but she knew that politics was involved. And since it was a private meeting, she was going to tell her honestly. It was said that the queen had no personal feelings for the girl, but it was not true. She was interested in her. She said that she makes her own decisions in life, and the queen did not understand why the princess so spoils her life by choosing to be with a scum. The woman thought that if Aristina didn't mind, Paella could make room for her, to which the second princess nodded positively, saying that she had the same right to Hamir. If Aristina wanted to be treated as a high-ranking noblewoman, she had to behave like one, because the queen thought that she deserved to be treated with dignity as her fiancé. But unfortunately, protecting this illegitimate child was a thorny path. Aristina, however, realized that she was not experiencing such a precious feeling as love, for from the age of 6, instead of in her heart of employment, so it did not work properly for a long time. They could continue to mock her, but had no right to discuss Tarkin, who wasn't even there. After all, her partner was going through a lot, and if she wasn't honest, it would be wrong. When Paella asked her what she liked so much about Tarkin, the girl answered that probably because he broke the bed. After her phrase, everyone present was confused and didn't know what to say. The queen, who had been married the longest of all those present, knew better than anyone else how important the behavior of partners in bed was, and kept her opinion to herself. Yenica did not understand what the importance of the bed was, and it was important that her brother would be better than her husband. This out-of-wedlock child cannot dominate the others. Aristina asked if all the words she had just said about low-born blood and illegitimacy applied to her husband. Yenica didn't know what to say to this question, so she said that she was in a bad mood, and she understood that she meant that unchanged people can't rule over others, and her words were taken wrongly. Aristina wondered why the girl had said the same thing in person, but Tarkin was not the kind of person who could be considered dirty. Did they really call Emperor Nefter's own child lowborn? Paella didn't understand why Princess Aristina wouldn't give in. After the bed talk, the queen had given up trying to win the princess to her side. Aristina explained that there was absolutely nothing wrong with him being born to a woman without a title, though his mother had no status. She was a royal descendant and had an official place in the harem, and the queen should have remembered how personally she had received her. The woman replied that she could not forget it, for it was a moment of shame that felt like an insect touching her fingertips. From time to time, the monsters migrate to the south, which is bordered by the Sullivan Empire. Within the country, there are noble families with vested interests. In order to quickly restore the peace that was in turmoil, Nefter decided to arrange a series of ongoing political marriages with neighboring noble families. The concubines were chosen carefully and strictly, and as queen, she was entrusted with their control. But the reason why Nefter bred himself a royal descendant with a useless commoner was to give her a title. But this commoner couldn't have gotten it while pregnant. He was a half-breed, And the queen didn't understand how pureblood heirs and half-breeds could be put on the same level, because each person had their own role from birth. Aristina was surprised that the queen didn't realize what she had done to Tarkin. For after his mother's death, the boy had been banished to defend the world on the frontier from raging monsters with only a dagger in his hand. He couldn't receive aid or supplies, and before they could do anything, the portal was forcibly activated, effectively a death. So asked her not to make her laugh with her highborn blood ties, for the queen had not an ounce of compassion inherent in humanity. And how could she speak of highborn blood ties when she wanted to kill a child? Aristina thought about it. The child that lost its mother was sent alone to the monster world. The mother, weak in body and died at an early age after her death became more frequent in the rivers of the common people. Tarkin overcame himself every time and survived, though he was a bastard child, which was very unfair, as he defeated the monsters of the plains and contributed greatly to the war with Sylvanus. She thought that Tarkin was a hero of this country. Tarkin's bravery was known in other countries. I didn't understand why the head wanted to blacken him so much. Then Aristina mentioned that she understood her as the queen was angry because of her husband's betrayal. The woman stood up and told her not to say another word. Aristina went on to say that this was the reason why she was so proud of her son, and the queen swung to hit her. But her hand was intercepted by Tarkana, who asked if she had just raised her hand on his wife. The queen did not understand how he dared to come there and be rude to the queen herself. The girls who were growing in the palace like flowers in a greenhouse felt for the first time such fury that came from Tarkan. Then Aristina called him to her, and Enika said in his back that if he was going to ignore what he had done, if Hamir had been there, he would have thrown him out, and hoped that the boy would never come back from the border. They left the place holding hands and walking, Tarkin not saying a word or explaining his invasion. They sat talking quietly for a while, and then the boy asked her if she knew she was sanguine, so she wouldn't take it too seriously. Sitting in the bushes, Jack Allen watched them, and Durant noticed that His Highness had changed. The man who had no interest in women and had built an iron wall in front of them had given orders that were different from the usual ones. Like a man who didn't belong here, he didn't belong in the palace and felt more comfortable on the battlefield. But with the arrival of the princess, he had changed. Both boys were very happy for him. Jack Allen said that Tarkin broke the bed in the usual way. It was not a demonstration of a kick or a game of breaking the bed vertically. It was all natural. Besides him, other soldiers also did not believe in the newspaper article, because if you look at Tarkin's usual actions, this option does not seem too realistic, even though it was spring outside. However, he was very happy for His Highness, because in the palace where many of his political opponents, he found his title Harbor. At the same time, Hamir received a letter from the palace saying that the queen was proud of him for leaving the palace to fulfill the duty of the royal family. But in his absence, the palace was in turmoil and his mother was homesick, so she asked him to entrust his work to others and return home. The man knew that his mother was like that, but he had told her before that he couldn't leave this business until he had conquered it completely. But one of the boys from the palace told him that the Marquis of Isara from the neutral faction had joined Tarkin. However, it didn't matter to Hamir whether the Marquis of Isara joined the Tarkin or not, because he knew that his mother would deal with it anyway. The important reason for the change that had made him worry was Princess Aristina, and Hamir wondered what kind of person she was. The next day, from the very morning Aristina was about to lead, wanted to go to the forge for personal business. Her maid was a little surprised because she could not go there personally. If there was a request, she could give it to her, but Aristina had already discussed it with Tarkin and decided to go herself. The maids who came with her from the Empire, from the window, watched the girl going to the forge, where there were a lot of men, and did not understand how the girl could go there alone. After all, it does not meet the standards of chastity to look only at her outfit, a dress revealing her legs, which had no decency. For such behavior, they thought that her husband would soon hate her and did not understand why she was so happy, since she could not behave like a lady, which was unfair and wrong. In the forge at Tarkin's court stood Retran, who was worried, for today was the day the princess was to come. He did not know what she would ask him to make, since she had been so courteous to him. Perhaps a hard-to-forge necklace of Philith, or a bracelet of the hard-to-work fluorite mined on the west coast. It would have been fine for him to make head jewelry with amethyst to match the color of the princess's eyes, for he believed that the princess was a match for everything. However, when he looked at her, he remembered the incident with the blade, for the weapon was the same white color as her. It was not a respectful thought, however, for he had left Catalaman to avoid making blades, but he was interrupted from his thoughts by the princess, who suddenly approached him. He greeted her, and the girl asked him to address her in a less formal manner, for they would be seeing each other quite often from now on. However, the boy replied that he did not agree, because he could not communicate with the princess in such a way, and decided not to change anything, and asked what he could do for Her Majesty. He remarked that it would be better to start with respect from the people of Irug, and suggested that it should be a bracelet suitable for her, or a tiara with a gem the size of an egg, or a spear with a huge blue imperial sapphire. The girl asked him to calm down, because what she wanted from him was not jewelry, but a sword that saves lives, namely a medical scalpel. Surprised to look at the sketch, because for the first time he saw scalpels of similar shape, in contrast to the usual scalpels at these in the corners of the hilt, shortened blade, and probably it was to increase accuracy, as in sculptural knives. The girl was glad, because what should have been expected from Retran, he just looked at the drawing and immediately realized that what she wanted to ask him to do was not like a normal scalpel, but a completely new scalpel, because in surgery, the precision of action is the life of the patient. However, the guy said in confusion that most people avoid such business. After all, when the operation is unsuccessful, only the doctor with a scalpel is blamed, and no one wants to take responsibility and be criticized. Local blacksmiths are tired of working on swords for those who value honor. Making household tools and scalpels is just a part-time job, barriers to entry into this business, high liability for accidents. In other words, the business of producing medical scalpels, this blue ocean. And also a great way to break into the business. In addition, the scalpel has a manual confirmed on numerous samples. It cannot fail. In fact, this design was not invented by Aristina, but simply stolen. But you have to be cocky to make a lot of money. Retran finally realized the possibilities of this project, because if he could improve the design of the scalpel, there would be fewer medical failures and fewer failed surgeries, and then people would become even healthier. He was delighted because thanks to her beautiful soul, he would be able to save at least some people who were sick from hopelessness. He recognized that he was acting like a child and avoided such a big problem. But Her Majesty, on the contrary, endured hardships to save people. He thought that she would become an outstanding person in this field, and was delighted with her soul that she cared for others. Aristina tried to explain that she did not think for a second about the benefits and thought about money, but the guy did not hear her. It was burdensome. If things worked out that way, it was useless to explain anything to him. So she just asked him when he could release the new scalpels. Rubbing his hands together, the guy told her not to worry because he had already saved the blueprint in his head and offered her a cup of tea, saying he'd be back before she started eating. All her life, Aristina had been devalued and waited for the Emperor's eye to awaken, for she possessed all the innate characteristics of white hair and kind, expressive eyes, but still had not awakened. For the sake of awakening the Emperor's eye, her father did not hesitate to use any methods or means. So he pushed her to do so, but it was useless, because by then she had already awakened, but didn't tell father that it had happened. 6 years old is not the age to live in solitary confinement. All trials can contribute to the development of mankind, for when she was sick, she asked for a healer or some medicine, but no one responded to her pleas. Now she sat and listened to the rhythmic sound of the anvil, which was not noisy, and on the contrary was like music. The boy already had a sample ready, according to the blueprint she had given him, but he had only to sharpen the blade sharper, and he did manage it before tea time. And though she didn't expect the mold to look like molded glass, the boy explained that she had inspired him so much that his blacksmith soul had responded instantly. When the girl excitedly called him a genius, he parried by saying that it's all thanks to her that she's the real genius, because simple ideas make a big difference. If you look at inventors, a lot of people would say it's crazy simple, but it's not as easy as it looks. Well, as nice as Aristina was to receive compliments, She was ashamed of the fact that the idea was not her, and hoped that he would stop looking at her with eyes full of reverence. So she explained that she had only memorized what had appeared in front of her eyes, and tried to reconstruct all the parts. In 1,000 years, the cases of the Emperor's eye could be counted on the fingers of one hand, so she didn't know if there were any cases like hers, but she might be the only one who could control the Emperor's gas. At first, she thought she was dead because she couldn't touch or understand anything. She could only stare at the world in silence, not knowing if she was dreaming or a ghost. But at the moment when she saw her for the first time for some reason, she realized everything, and just could understand that she was different in character, appearance, age, but it was really her. According to her father's words, the trials cause people to awaken the Emperor's eye one more level in the moment before death. She was able to see the desired moment of her past life, and then there were many things that she didn't understand. In particular, she didn't understand the decision to voluntarily transplant her father's liver, but thanks to him, she was now making a profit, because she's seen a lot of medical instruments. Also, in her past life, she had accumulated a lot of knowledge from documentaries and dramas about surgeries and hospitals, despite the surface of the water. She would play and pause the video and then repeat it. So she repeated different videos from different angles and ended up with a plausible drawing. One of the scalpels was easy to make, but the rest would take longer because there was a basic model and they needed to add some finishing touches to it. Tarkin, who had interrupted them, came into the workshop and said that as much as the girl loved her business, she should have kept track of time. But the girl realized what she was talking about when she looked out the window, because she hadn't noticed how the time had passed and that it was already dark. Tarkin was jealous, for the daily words about her first officer were constantly heard, and he wondered if she was his type. When he wanted to talk to them, the girl stopped him, saying that they were talking about business and that he should wait a bit because they had to finish the drawings, as they were confidential. She had a great idea, but for some reason, she was shy to show it, probably because she didn't make it, but she wanted to show Tarkin the finished new product. She planned to keep the scalpel as a keepsake. It was one of the things she had planned to do since her imprisonment. Without any skill or opportunity to learn, she wondered how the people around her lived and what they did for it. Seeing the world through the Emperor's eye, she began to make plans and regrets. If she didn't have those visions and regrets, she wouldn't have been able to overcome the long period of living alone. It was ironic, because she was imprisoned because of the Emperor's eye, but she was alive because of it too. When the servants who passed her small things during her imprisonment and saw her using the Emperor's eye spread rumors that she was either insane or in a bad mood. As sad as it was, the Emperor thought she was a complete fool, which was for the best, but more importantly, Tarkin, and she was glad she had met a really good partner. When she was done thinking about it, she went over to the guys. Retran said he was going to work on the mistakes and show her the improved version, but he looked very strange. Aristina didn't expect Tarkin to come. He could have sent a maid, but he explained that when they made a pact with her, they agreed that he would protect her. The forge was inside Tarkin's palace, and it was safe, and she didn't understand if he was acting like a guard on purpose or if something had happened. When the guy dismissed her worries by saying that nothing had happened, she thanked him for everything, for coming with her, and for making room in the forge for Retran, and for protecting her from the queen. The business had absolutely nothing to do with his ascension to the throne. She admitted that it was all pure greed. She had no power now, but she would make it known. She told him that she planned to raise the price and make a big profit, meaning the rent of the forge, and explained that she was looking for land in the capital that she could buy, but it looked like the money she had gotten from the knights would barely cover the cost of construction. So she's renting it temporarily until a suitable land can be used to build a forge, and was willing to pay back the interest later. However, the man said that she could just use his forge without any problems, and as he had said before, she was his wife, and everything in the palace also belonged to her. However, it didn't suit the girl that he didn't want payment, and as close as they were in a family relationship, he couldn't help but want payment for it because she had grown so much. It was awkward and hard for her. Plus, she realized that in the event of a divorce, she wouldn't be able to call her husband's house her own, and she wasn't that naive. The girl was confused because she also wanted to be the person who could give something to Tarkin, But he did not demand anything, and his only wish was that Aristina should be near him. Already in the palace, she pondered over his words, not understanding what it meant. Maybe he was afraid that his political enemies would act, because she had already had a fight with the queen once. Aristina has been extremely busy lately, but after solving the toughest money issue of equipment costs, things have been going quite smoothly. So she does her duties as a princess, training with Jacqueline in the morning, and in the evenings she goes to the forge and helps Retran. She had a lot of things to do as she put her heart into every little detail, from how to store the iron since the forge had been turned into a warehouse, to comparing the length of the scalpel hilt with commercially available samples. The biggest problem now was the number of notches to prevent the handle from slipping, because each notch changed the price, and that was how the nights passed quickly with hard work. And when she left the forge, Tarkin was always waiting for her. She wondered what kind of meeting he was having every time she left the forge. When the girl asked him why he didn't put another guard on her if it wasn't necessary, he answered that he always took the long way out. But of course, the point was always the same. According to him, the girl felt that he was sincere. If it was not a hardship for him, it was. But the inner voice said that in this way, he was trying to flirt with her. One evening, she decided not to go to the forge because the matter had reached a certain stage, and she needed to consult a specialist, and went to the medical center of Tarkin's palace. At the entrance to the hospital, she was met by Umir, the military physician of Tarkin's court, who was in charge of this magnificent clinic where all the great wars had been treated. She explained that it was the off-season for breeding monsters, so they were relatively free, but that this was the only time in this busy hell of a time to rest. And since the princess had seen her face, her assistant Anna would help her with the rest. Aristina explained that she didn't really come there for a tour, but to ask her for something, because the girl was the best in surgery and she had the tools for it. After testing the instruments, Umir was delighted, because with its help she reached bones, skin, flesh, and even blood vessels, and did not understand why she herself in her head did not come up with this ingenious idea, because with these tools we can make less effort and work much more accurately and cut much more. Aristina was glad she liked it, but she felt that there was too much blood coming out of the patients. She wasn't sure if everything would be all right. Her assistant explained that Mrs. Umir had a tendency to operate on small wounds, so she didn't have to worry about it, because a person wouldn't die from a cut. Umir continued to admire the new instruments, realizing that it was possible to abandon all standard scalpels, and she had developed too much dopamine. Catching the princess's gaze, she asked if she knew why the girl was under the command of His Highness Tarkin, for the whole reason was not, as Aristina had suggested, that they could cut more, for she was not a mad doctor, and the reason was the beauty of His Highness Tarkin, the shape of his bones, the amount of muscle, the beauty, the perfect structure of his ears. And she thought that in the water schedule, there must be such a treat for the eyes. But Umir was disappointed, for Tarkin had not been injured in raids lately, and he had a lot of work to do, so she was bored with the ugly men, and the tools were so old that she felt as if they would break in her weak hands, and she was sad that there was no joy in the drudgery of daily life. However, looking at the princess carefully, Umir approached her hand, noticing that she had small hands and velvety skin, so she asked if she would allow her to lick her hand. When Aristina said no, the doctor was upset because she was too strict, but it didn't change anything because it only made her desire more attractive. She was the best doctor in Aruga, and at an early age she had gone to the front lines and became Tarkin's confidant. Since Tarkin had trusted her with his life, Aristina could trust her too, but that wasn't enough. But since she had heard her thoughts on the use of the scalpel, she wanted the girl to check something else and handed her a small folder. Umir realized that the princess was the author of these creations and was surprised because everything was briefly and clearly stated there. She tried to describe the scalpel objectively. For this, she used evaluation tables and medical structures, so the structure was perfect. Thanks to the verified points, it was possible to see the improvement goals. The redesign of the scalpel is already a revolution, but she wanted to improve even more. And if they were officially approved, even in case of medical conflict, doctors would not be able to object to the quality. Since Umir was interested, and whatever it would bring her in the future, she gladly agreed to participate in her case, and planned to wait not with patience, and was sure that other doctors would also agree with her. After this conversation, Umir decided to give the girl a tour of the hospital and asked if she had already received pre-orders, because she was sure that scalpels will definitely buy looking at her tables. That's why she decided to order this amount of scalpels to begin with, because she was the hospital manager, and there was no reason to save money on saving people. So she offered the princess to make a deal with her first. Aristina was glad that she got the order and improved the quality of the product. Everything was fine. She had Retran, but she didn't realize what the problem was. And maybe things were going too well. One of Aristina's maids, Lady Rosalind, approached the other maid to ask if anything was wrong, because her face looked as if she was afraid of something. But Lady Melody could not stand it and said that she could not know anything about it, for she had been a traitor to the princess, and now she had come to her again. Rosalind noticed that all this time it was hard to get along with the others, and she knew that she had a kind, open soul, so she always tried to reconcile them with the girl. But Rosalind was busy pouring out her anger, and she was ashamed that the girl who was always smiling and looking like a graceful wild rose looked troubled. She apologized, though they were from the same country, and said that Lady Brody was in a rather strange state of mind. She was afraid of death, and she was trying to reject reality, and it was a lot simpler than she had realized. When Brody saw Rosalind in her room, she was angry and didn't understand how Melody had let the woman wagging her tail in front of the princess in the first place. She didn't realize that the girl wanted to be alone. Rosalind heard her, however, and noticed that Brody was limping. When a person was in pain, he was unable to speak sincerely, but only lied. She had realized this when she had looked after her sick grandmother. She understood her completely. Brody was a chaste lady, and she was ashamed to show her ankle to strangers and even barbarians. But she knew someone who would discreetly bring the Sylvanian doctor, because if Brody left it as it was, it could only get worse. Rosalind asked, did they really believe that she had become the dog of a woman with absolutely nothing of a princess in her? In the center of the vast tract of land on Tarkin's training ground stand stately buildings smelling of red-hot iron, whose purpose has been divided by the structures of work. The courtyard differs in its scale from other palace plazas, but the knights saw a carriage with aquamarines and decorations on a white background. They assumed it was Her Majesty's carriage that had come to visit His Majesty Tarkin, for he would go straight to a meeting after a meal. Jacqueline was told that the princess had just entered the main gate and would be here shortly, and he realized that this was a problem, for His Majesty had much material to deal with after lunch. His Highness was sick of the distinction between private and public. He made no exceptions, and it seemed that the princess who had only recently become his wife knew nothing of his character. The knight told Tarkin that if the princess was dressed like that and wanted to see him, it would take up his entire lunch hour, and he was afraid that it would worsen the relationship between them, because most likely he had spoken without thinking. He tried to justify himself by saying that they had seen each other this morning and not much time had passed, and she had already come to see him. He had absolutely no bad intentions, and if she didn't disturb him, he didn't see anything wrong with it. He and his wife were the same only when they got married, looking around because they wanted to see each other and were bored while they worked. They looked for excuses such as passing lunch and meeting over the fence, and wondered if the princess was the same person. Smiling Tarkin said anything was possible, and everyone was surprised how he could be in such a mood. Unless the issue was business or money, it was probably politics. The guys thought he would wait for her quietly, but he personally went to meet her, which absolutely everyone present was surprised. He was followed by Mukali, who was overjoyed when he heard that Thumbelina had arrived. The knight was completely shocked, for he could not realize that it was the same man who had ignited the fire of discontent at the news of Princess Sylvanus' arrival, and who had gone off the chain when he heard of the political marriage. As Aristina stood below waiting for Tarkin, she heard terribly loud shouts, realizing that it was probably Tarkin's warriors, for their spirits had always been strong. Going down the steps, Tarkin noticed that the girl was so beautiful that for a moment he was speechless, her hair glistening in the sunlight. Today she looked especially pure and radiant. He noticed the silk dress she was wearing, but immediately thought about it. For when they had breakfast together, she had been in completely different clothes. She had a box and a basket in her hands. He did not know the purpose of the box, but the basket was sure that she had brought the afternoon desserts that they would go to together. The girl was worried that she was interrupting, but she was told that it was his lunchtime, which was why she had come. Tarkin assured her that he still had time. The men watching and listening to the conversation were surprised, wondering where he had learned to lie so shamelessly, for in fact he had no time. They realized that the man who did not even pay attention to the dancers had changed a lot after marriage, as they wrote in the newspapers this love of the century, and they had seen the princess so close for the first time. After Aristina was sure that he was free, she called Mukali and said hello to him, which the guy was madly happy, because he was also happy to finally see her again. The girl replied that she had come to meet him and had come to show him what she had promised earlier, but the man asked her not to say things that could be misinterpreted. When Mukali realized the promise in question, he realized that those words had become his black ribbon, and he should not have agreed. Immediately after, Tarkin approached him, realizing that absolutely all the treats and desserts had been brought for Mukali, and asked him to thank the princess, throwing jealous glances. The girl tried to calm Tarkin, who knew that she went to the forge every day and worked hard there to create something, but did not understand why the first thing she did was to tell Mukali about it, and not her husband. She tried to explain that the man had helped her a lot and they had traveled to Catalaman together. She promised to tell him first, and they agreed to have tea together after the project was finished and discuss everything. Tarkin understood that she cared for Retran because he was her first employee and asked if she was going to maintain polite relations with her first business partner. The girl was a little upset, explaining that she wanted to show him the perfect new product and didn't realize she didn't have to say it out loud because it was a surprise. Sitting on the chair, the girl didn't understand how it happened because originally she wanted to meet Mukali one-on-one, but now it was the voice of a warrior full of sadness, trying to save his comrade in case of refusal there would be a conflict. But there was nothing to worry about because all the people present were Tarkin's trusted people. Also, she noticed that Tarkin and Umir had the same questions, but they were right, because the more objective data you add to the table, the more was the trust in the text. So the girl announced that she wanted to test a new product he did not have the credit of trust, and immediately saw several volunteers. Aristina turned to Tarkin, remembering that last night they were talking on the road when he met her, and he was the first to show his trust in her. So she reflected that she had drawn too bright a line between his things and her things. Until now, she had always been alone and wanted to do everything on her own. But here she was not confined, and she too must open her soul to this place. She too must establish a relationship in which she would help freely. So she said that she could use all his property in order to be able to develop, and decided to take one step forward, which Tarkin was very happy about. After that, a maid came to them, hoping that they had finally finished an important conversation, and told them that they could continue socializing while enjoying the scones that the princess had prepared and brought for everyone. The rest of the warriors were completely shocked because she was talking about dry rations for the warriors, and as it turned out, they were not designed for dry rations, but made by the confectioner of Her Highness. The maid said that these desserts had been ordered by Her Highness from the pastry chef some time ago, and since the warriors were actively working with their heads, they could try the chocolate fountain and the latte with salted caramel. Tarkin's teeth began to ache at the mere sight of them, and he didn't understand why she liked all these desserts so much. His wife appeared so happy, and the fact that he looked pathetic in front of the servants was even better. In the backyard of Tarkin's palace, Rosalind was comforting Melody, who, if it weren't for her, wouldn't have been able to solve Lady Brody's problem. She didn't even want to imagine since Brody could throw tantrums after receiving Scar, and it never came to that. Melody even asked the other maids to keep an eye on her, but nothing worked. While talking to Brody, Rosalind tried to prove that she hadn't really gone over to the princess's side, because in Sylvanus, Aristina wasn't even considered a princess, just a street girl. Originally, this scar was supposed to remain on the princess's face. The maids were talking amongst themselves, not knowing whether to believe her, but it seems that she was not playing around, but was genuinely angry and assumed that she had not actually gone to the princess's side. Taking Rosalind's hand, Melody said that if she had told her in advance that she was going to side with the princess, It would have been better, because she had despised her for a long time, and she had really hurt her deeply. Rosalind apologized and told about the saying to deceive your allies to deceive your enemies, because at the time, she thought it was the best way to learn about the princess's weaknesses. During their conversation, they came to the conclusion that if they missed any detail, Prince Tarkin would gain influence over it, for the warriors and courtiers like them were too loyal to Prince Tarkin. The princess was nothing without him. She behaved so grandly that Rosalind thought she had his support, but it turned out not to be so. The maids clamored around her, and the soldiers treated her like a crown princess because of Tarkan's influence. She only acted as if everything was in her power, which is amazing because she married well and her life took on new colors, but no one knew how long that would last. Now she gets special treatment because of the nights she spends with the prince, but when she spends her fortune and the prince realizes how soft this woman is, the princess will do the same. Rosalind then said that a girl like Melody would be much more suitable to be the prince's wife. His Highness Tarkan should see what she was really like, and also said that the princess has never made tea for the prince, because the princess is not trained in the basics of etiquette, so she behaved so proudly in front of the king. But it is said that ignorance can be useful, so it is better not to bring tea that is not to his taste. And if you think about it, there were many strange things. Melody did not know how Rosalind found the doctor so quickly, because she said that she did not have any connections in Erugo. Then Diona came up to them and introduced herself, and if they were interested in what His Highness Tarkin liked, she was happy to help. And as expected, the Princess of Sylvanus had some incredible maids. Diona could already tell for sure that Tarkan hates sweets. He doesn't eat sweets even with tea. Just a bite makes his face displeased. At official events he has no choice, so he eats a couple of bites, but his longtime servants know the truth. At the same time, Princess Aristina was feeding Tarkin sweets. After that, he asked for a latte with salted caramel and drank it in one gulp. Aristina realized that he didn't like sweets and didn't know why he didn't tell her about it before. He didn't have to eat everything. The girl was ashamed. She should have asked him what he liked first. In this situation, it was too much sweetness for Tarkan. He used to cringe at the sight of chocolate fondue and talk as if his teeth were rotten. Normally, she wouldn't have made such a mistake. Lately, she'd been agitated because she'd done it, and then thought it might be because the weather was gradually improving, or because sometimes the people here were very affectionate and nice. So she asked him to be honest next time, because she didn't want to force him to eat something he didn't like. Then she realized what she had said, because she didn't know what Tarkan liked and didn't like, and she had already concluded that she wanted to know absolutely everything about him, and where his affection came from.